Lord of the Mysteries, Silver Key by author Xiang Bu Dao by Ming Liao. Chapter 201-225. Chapter 201. The Powerful, Ugly Duckling, Magic. From the unknowable sublime, the door above dimensions, the embodiment of art and fantasy. I implore your protection, I implore. On the ground, Lawrence, struggling to prop up his upper body, recited those honorific names in ancient Hermes language, which he had silently repeated countless times in his heart. After repeating them twice, he could no longer hold on and collapsed to the ground. His remaining consciousness kept his eyes wide open, gazing at the night sky, which was tinged with a layer of crimson, awaiting his miracle. Would it really succeed? In a trance, he saw an indescribably great figure sitting above the cosmos. It was as if he stood eternally outside the world, looking down on the mortal realm, a recorder of the world, an observer, or perhaps a creator. Thoughts emerged uncontrollably in his mind, and then he saw the magnificent figure standing outside the world cast its gaze upon him. The next second, the terrifying whispers that had constantly surrounded his ears and directly affected his spirit body disappeared. After lying on the ground for several seconds, Lawrence, recovering from the pain, finally regained his strength and stood up, supporting himself with his hands on the ground. He bowed respectfully to the deep night sky, dotted with a few stars, above his head. Praise to you, the sublime from the unknowable. You are the door above dimensions, you are the embodiment of art and fantasy, the benevolent salvation, the most dazzling light of hope in the darkness. Thank you for your mercy and salvation, for helping me through the pain. Above dimensions, Xiang awkwardly pinched his brow. Although he felt such praise was well deserved, hearing it firsthand was still somewhat embarrassing. After adapting slightly to this embarrassment, Xiang, enduring Lawrence's effusive praise, raised his hand and snapped his fingers. Snap! A faint mist suddenly appeared in front of Lawrence, weaving into lines of Loan words. Use your experience to help my dependents establish the prototype of a Beander faction in Backland. In exchange, you will safely pass through every full moon. Seeing the lines of words formed by the mist in front of him, Lawrence was not nervous or worried, he even felt a sense of relief. In this world where true gods exist, clearly priced help is far more reassuring than a deity's generous grace. Moreover, compared to the help he received, the price he had to pay was quite small. It didn't require him to offer his faith or soul, didn't involve the Abraham family, and didn't force him to do anything against his will. The only slightly troublesome thing was that he would have to stay in Backland for a long time. After all, helping the dependents of that great existence establish a Beander faction from scratch, even if it was just a prototype, was quite difficult, especially in a place like Backland. He paused, looking at where the misty words had disappeared, wanting to ask who this dependence of the great existence was, but in the next second, Xiang's figure flashed through his mind. This extraordinary speed of advancement indeed aligns with the god dependents mentioned in the family records. Above dimensions, Xiang nodded with satisfaction at Lawrence's reaction. Establishing a faction was preparation for future anchors. He wasn't sure if he would need them, but it was always good to prepare in advance. Moreover, this also kept Lawrence in Backland, and only within the range where he could respond to prayers would he not have to worry about the other party suddenly dying during the next full moon. More importantly, he liked the feeling of tricking others into working without having to pay wages. After a brief moment of wandering thoughts, he controlled his spirit to leave above dimensions. The moment his consciousness returned to his body, the crimson, full moon, in his hand extinguished directly, and the crimson moonlight illuminating the surroundings quickly dissipated into nothingness. After waiting a few more seconds, the layer of lightless, black curtain, that had always covered the open space in front of him completely dissipated after losing the support of spirituality. He looked at Lawrence, who seemed to be in good condition, and was about to speak when he suddenly felt a pang in his heart, and every hair on his body stood on end. His spiritual intuition warned him that danger was approaching. The next second, brilliant starlight flew out of the void, quickly outlining an illusory door covered with mysterious symbols and patterns. Verdu and Owen appeared from behind the door. Before they could ask, Xiang stepped forward and pushed Lawrence towards them. Don't waste words, quickly take him and leave, dangerous Beanders are rushing over. Then Owen opened his mouth, but his words stopped abruptly before he could finish. The clown's intuitive premonition was triggered. he saw his clothes, pants, and shoes come alive and betray him. They tightly constricted him, and he saw the surrounding grass blades, dead branches, and stones, like bullets fired from a steam rifle, densely engulfing him. Beside him, Lawrence, an astrologer, and Verdu also felt the warning from their spiritual intuition. The sense of panic from all directions almost suffocated them. Without the slightest hesitation, Verdu reached out and tugged at the door pattern on his classical robe, which was composed of emeralds, rubies, and diamonds. The gems embedded in the robe glowed brightly, emitting clear, brilliant starlight, and quickly expanded, forming an illusory door shimmering with starlight. At the same time, an illusory, slowly turning book was reflected in Syrian's eyes. I come, I see, I record. In an instant, the area within 40 to 50 meters was filled with clear, holy, silvery white morning light. Under the cover of the morning light, the swaying grass blades, dead branches, and stones around them all paused, and a faint, transparent figure, seemingly present and then not, emerged and then silently disappeared, unforeseen. How could it suddenly target me? As his thoughts drifted, Syrian's gaze fell upon the crimson moon crown he held in his hand. He seemed to know the reason he was targeted. He should have recorded it after the full moon, and then sold the item to the sanguiner Miss Sharon. As the thought flashed through his mind, his clothes and pants suddenly tightened, constricting him so tightly that he couldn't breathe. And his bones made clicking sounds. Before he felt his ribs were about to break, he rubbed his index finger against his pant leg twice. Puff! The corner of his clothes and a few dead branches on the ground around him ignited. An illusory book was once again reflected in his eyes. The flickering flames on his clothes instantly expanded, engulfing his entire body. Flame jump from the magician. Just before the flame jump was completed, a layer of white frost suddenly emerged from the ground, instantly extinguishing the few weak, flickering flames. Flame jump failed. Having lost the special protection provided by the Beyonder ability during flame jump, Syrian instantly felt the scorching of the flames on his body. He had played with fire and got burned. Syrian didn't care about the scorching flames on his body. He glanced at the location where Owen and the others had teleported away, and the crimson moon crown in his hand once again transformed into a crimson, full moon. Crimson moonlight spilled all around, illuminating the darkness, bringing forth the growth of spirituality, the enhancement of inspiration. At the same time, the illusory, slowly turning book in his eyes reappeared. I come, I see, I record. Amidst the crimson-tinged flames, Syrian, his back slightly hunched from the scorching, grew pure white, illusory feathers out of thin air. These feathers clustered into a pair of pure white, broad wings, which then slowly and irresistibly unfurled. Beneath the wings, Syrian's figure transformed into a blurry humanoid composed of colorful starlight and countless transparent, wing-like membranes. At this instant, everything stood still, as if a pause button had been pressed, and reality was frozen into a painting. Mystical reenactment from Bernadette, the ugly duckling, which allows the user to display an incomplete mythical creature form. Syrian did not have an incomplete mythical creature form, but the ugly duckling, mystical reenactment displayed one's own essence, which allowed him to actively reveal his own corruption to the outside world. Beside his right hand, which held the full moon, a transparent figure, filled with pain and distorted to the point of almost deforming, was outlined out of thin air. It was a male wearing a black clerical robe. He wore a black glove on his left hand, his face was gaunt, his skin was brownish, and his eyes were sunken as if he were a mummy. At this moment, the skin on his body was like the shroud on a mummy, old and separated from his flesh, hanging loosely on him. Beneath the skin, there was no normal flesh and blood, but a humanoid mass of constantly wriggling, evil, pitch-black viscous liquid. Chapter 202, Pollution. The moment Syrian saw the evil, viscous black liquid beneath the strip-like drooping skin, his thoughts froze, and a sinister, painful, evil, and malicious roar inexplicably echoed in his mind. This sound was like countless invisible, tiny mouths gnawing at his spirit body. Beneath the pure white, broad wings, black dots continuously appeared on Syrian's blurry human form, which was composed of colorful starlight and countless transparent wing-like membranes. But they were quickly assimilated by the colorful starlight and then disappeared. Each time a black dot disappeared, Syrian's mind gained some new knowledge. Some of these were strange techniques like picking locks with wire or digging tunnels with a spoon, Others were methods of cursing people using blood, hair, and other items, and there were even potion formulas for a prisoner and a lunatic. During the silent standoff, the surrounding air became viscous, and spirituality slowed, almost solidifying. Whether it was the soil on the ground or the surrounding weeds and bushes, everything was covered in a layer of colorful, sticky liquid that continuously bloomed with starlight, and many strange things grew from it. There were dense blood vessels like spiderwebs, struggling eyeballs, and tongues with sharp fangs. They often exploded as soon as they appeared, leaving behind puddles of colorful, ink-like viscous liquid. In just a few seconds, the originally green field had turned into a spilled palette. Soon, the wings, clustered with numerous pure white, illusory feathers, disappeared, and Syrian's figure returned to normal. He immediately averted his gaze, not looking at the already semi-out-of-control puppet. In his eyes, an illusory, slowly turning book appeared. I came, I saw, I recorded. As the incantation appeared, he reached into the cold, viscous air and pulled out a sharp, sturdy, heavy, and broad two-handed greatsword. The sword of dawn of a dawn paladin. Without hesitation, he half knelt and plunged the sword of dawn he had just condensed into the ground before him. The silver greatsword then disintegrated, turning into countless fragments of dawn-like light. They were dense and innumerable, forming a flashing and violent, sharp hurricane that swept forward, cutting all shadows and all evil within the covered area into pieces. The Dawn Paladin's most powerful attack, Storm of Light. Although the storm of light he reproduced was only half as powerful as Father Utravsky's, it was still an extremely powerful strike. The moment the sharp silver storm swept over him, the nearly semi-out-of-control puppet's form twisted, turning into a palm-sized mystical puppet, wrapped in blood-colored thorns, and bearing a 3 or 4/10 resemblance to Syrian. Source of curse. Having already suffered pollution and being semi-out of control, this puppet could no longer rationally restrain himself and directly targeted Syrian as a cursed target through the connection established by the pollution on his body. Although this connection could synchronize the damage suffered by both parties, it would also make the pollution on him more severe, until he slid into an uncontrollable abyss. But, being semi-out of control, he seemed to have no rationality left to consider these issues. As the sharp silver storm swept through, the mystical puppet was instantly cut with countless dense, shallow, or deep wounds. In the open area at the center of the storm of light, Syrian, half kneeling on the ground, rapidly thinned and became brittle, finally turning into a crudely cut paper substitute. The moment the paper substitute appeared, it was torn into fragments, the largest no bigger than a fingernail, by an invisible force. Syrian's figure appeared not far away, then again turned into a paper substitute, which quickly shattered. This repeated 3 times, consuming all the paper substitutes he had recorded, before he finally escaped the puppet's curse on him. Because he lost his control, the raging silver storm gradually subsided. Syrian stood a dozen meters away, looking at the tattered mystical puppet that could no longer maintain its form, and let out a soft breath. Fortunately, the medium through which he established a connection with me was pollution, so the curse that ultimately fell upon me was significantly weakened and no longer possessed the characteristic of directly targeting the main body, allowing it to be evaded by the paper substitute. As his thoughts drifted, he suddenly turned his head and reached out his left hand to pinch the air in front of him. An invisible ripple spread out, and then the puppet, dressed in a black clerical robe, fell out of the air. He collapsed directly onto the ground, like a mummy that had melted in the sun. Beneath the skin, which seemed like a mass of intertwined rags, the liquid stained with colorful starlight could no longer be controlled and overflowed. Having directly perceived Syrian's essence and then used a curse through establishing a connection, the accumulated pollution on his body had reached an uncontrollable state. Under Syrian's gaze, the overflowing liquid, stained with colorful starlight, began to twist, as if struggling against some invisible force. Under the influence of this force, the surrounding spirituality became viscous, almost solidified, becoming an inescapable restraint. The pollution from the mother tree of desire on him was fighting against the pollution from Syrian. Before the struggle, which was leaning to one side, completely failed, he finally regained some residual rationality, and his right hand, wearing a black glove, moved almost imperceptibly. The next moment, the colorful starlight staining the evil liquid constantly overflowing from his body abruptly disappeared, transferred out of thin air. The The sudden change made Syrian pause, and then a thick black mist emanated from his back, forming a pair of illusory bat wings, carrying him a little further away. As he retreated, the puppet, slumped on the ground, seemed to glance at him, then quickly became transparent and vanished from the spot. Where the other party disappeared, Syrian saw a black glove lying quietly there. Ah, not so quiet. The glove seemed to come alive, its 5 fingers alternately stepping on the ground, as if cheering or learning to walk. Seemingly sensing Syrian's gaze, the glove wobbled towards him. Then its index and middle fingers stood on the ground like feet, its thumb pressed against its front, its pinky behind its back, and its ring finger bent and pressed into the web of its hand, performing an awkward gentleman's bow. Syrian, what should I do if I don't really want to admit that this abstract thing is the result of my pollution? As his thoughts drifted, he suddenly looked up into the distance. There were presences approaching with spiritual pressure, and more than one. After a moment of hesitation, he took out a brand new deck of tarot cards from his pocket, letting them stand vertically or horizontally at the spot where the puppet had just disappeared. In the very center, a Wheel of Fortune card lay flat. What a pity, one more corpse would have made it perfect. He murmured, then made the full moon illuminating the surroundings disappear. Then, a thick black mist formed a pair of illusory bat wings behind him, giving him a boost in speed. Noticing Syrian's movement, the strange glove, which seemed to be acting like a gentleman, leapt towards him, grabbed his coattail, and vanished with him into the darkness. Not long after Syrian left, a gust of wind suddenly swept through the sky, and the tarot cards Syrian had scattered on the ground also swayed, as if about to be blown away at any moment. Immediately after, a snake, a god singer wearing a black soft hat and a black robe embroidered with storm symbols, with unusually serious silver eyes, landed on the ground amidst the swirling wind. Looking at the tarot cards on the ground that had been shifted by the wind, his already serious face darkened slightly. 5 or 6 seconds later, Horamic Haydn, carrying a jet-powered flight pack, also arrived. He also saw the tarot cards on the ground that had shifted slightly and calmly asked, "Is it the rogue Black Emperor again?" Perhaps, but he did not linger like yesterday. At 15 Minsk Street, layers of faint blue ripples spread across the bay window in the living room, condensing into an illusory door. Syrian's figure flashed behind the door, then quickly materialized in the living room. Once his figure solidified, he immediately threw the crown he held, which was shaped like a full moon and inlaid with rows of red gems, towards Klein, who was sitting on the sofa. "The transaction I mentioned earlier can begin at any time. Oh, and remember to give the other party a friendly reminder, there seems to be a contingency left by the Rose School of Thought on this thing. Using it might allow a demigod from the Rose School of Thought to pinpoint your location." Klein, who had been sitting leisurely, paused slightly, suddenly feeling that the object in his hand was somewhat hot. After a pause, he carefully placed the crown aside, then asked curiously, "Will my location only be pinpointed when I use it? And how did you discover that?" Syrian shrugged. "Apparently, I just encountered a demigod from the Rose School of Thought." Klein, "You came to me so quickly to avoid subsequent danger and want to trade it away, right?" Syrian did not answer the question, instead explaining, "Don't worry, that demigod didn't pursue me. For a while, he probably won't have the energy to deal with this matter again." After a pause, his gaze fell on the newspaper open on the coffee table in front of Klein. Rogue, Black Emperor. Chapter 203 Altar. The Rogue, Black Emperor. After half a second of silence, Klein suddenly tilted his chin. "That's right, it's me." "Oh." Syrian nodded and turned to leave. "Aren't you surprised at all?" Klein's eyes widened, his clown-level facial expression management almost losing control. Syrian thought for a moment, then said in an exaggerated and affected tone, "Well, wow. Klein, too. Let's be a bit more normal." After a slight pause, he briefly described his discoveries in Capin's villa and the things he had done. Finally, he added, "There's a lot of strangeness about this matter. First, Capin is just an ordinary wealthy man and human trafficker. Although he has some assets, he couldn't possibly hire so many Beyonders to protect himself, including a Sequence 6 and several Sequence 7 Beyonders. Second, the Beyonders protecting him are all from the Arbiter pathway. As far as I know, in Loan, this pathway is mainly controlled by the royal family. Also, after I caused that commotion, the first to arrive wasn't the church, but a military Beander who was very likely a demigod. I deduced this from the subsequent progress of my magician potion digestion. Oh, and I also found the person Mr. Hanged Man asked us to keep an eye on in Captain's villa. Although he had changed his appearance and disguised himself, I still recognized him. Syrian nodded in feigned contemplation, then whispered. Clearly, the Loan royal family is involved in this matter, but it shouldn't be purely for profit. Money is no longer that important to the truly upper-class nobles. He paused, his gaze falling on the last paragraph of the newspaper, his tone rising slightly. So, how much gold did you get from Captain's villa safe? Hearing this question, Klein's face darkened, and he gritted his teeth. I didn't do that. Syrian sighed and shook his head. That's a bit of a shame. You almost paid off your debt and even got a little rich. Klein, mouth. Don't mention it, he was already regretting it a little. After some playful banter, Syrian brought up the most important reason for his visit tonight. I need to record a few more paper substitutes. After leaving Klein, Syrian went to Owen's house, informed Owen and the others who had teleported away earlier that he was safe, and then quietly returned home through the mirror world. Ignoring the black glove on his desk trying to show off, Syrian pulled a chair and sat down, recalling the events of the night. The puppet tonight was most likely chasing the Crimson Moon Crown, but how did he discover and pinpoint the Crimson Moon Crown? Was it because of the commotion I made with the full moon, or are there hidden pitfalls in this mystical item that I haven't noticed? It's a pity I couldn't keep that puppet from the Rose School of Thought. However, the Crimson Moon Crown has already been given to Klein for him to trade with Miss Sharon, so I don't need to worry about this issue anymore. Speaking of which, the ugly duckling mystical reenactment is truly powerful. 99% of the credit for me making a demigod flee in disarray tonight goes to it. But there are some things to pay attention to. Demigods with divinity can resist this kind of contamination to a certain extent. Although it's still unavoidable, they can put up some resistance. A demigod's resistance, even if weakened, is still very dangerous for me right now. If the puppet demigod tonight hadn't used a curse that required establishing a connection between both parties, and if I hadn't just recorded a few paper substitutes, I would definitely have messed up. I also need to be wary of followers of evil gods and favored ones of righteous gods. Contamination can counteract contamination, so they will be more resistant to contamination than ordinary demigods. Tonight's battle also indirectly showed that the contamination I actively displayed relying on the ugly duckling mystical reenactment, although high in essence, is actually only at the angel level of intensity. This should be limited by my own sequence, but it's completely sufficient. Anyway, as long as I have the ugly duckling recorded on me, I can walk sideways below demigods, contend with demigods, and cower when encountering angels. So I still need to find an opportunity to record the ugly duckling again from Bernadette. This mystical reenactment is really too useful. As his thoughts drifted, his spiritual perception was suddenly triggered. As soon as he looked up, he saw green vines hanging down before his eyes. These vines intertwined, covering the surroundings like a downpour. In the blink of an eye, Syrian found himself in a verdant forest from his room. Bernadette, wearing a girlish yellow-tiered dress and an old-fashioned black soft hat with fine mesh veiling her face, sat leaning on a swing woven from vines. Before Syrian could speak, several pages of Rosal's diary, with untidy and not-so-good handwriting, floated down from midair to him, which he caught. These are the diary entries you need to translate today. I'll be leaving Backland for a while, so I need you to settle the teaching content for the next few days in advance. Translating these diary entries all at once shouldn't be difficult for you, right? Before Syrian could voice his conflicted thoughts, Bernadette added, I've found a clue to a mystical item containing a traveler characteristic. Syrian immediately nodded firmly, not difficult. Anyway, it's the great emperor who's socially dying, not me. As his thoughts flew, he looked down at the Rosal's diary in his hand. January 10th. I visited Sonia Island, also known as Ancient Elf Island, which has a large number of elf ruins and customs remaining. January 17th. I dreamed of my almost forgotten homeland. After translating the Rosal's diary given by Bernadette, Syrian asked her to record the ugly duckling mystical reenactment again. But his luck today seemed to have run out, as he failed to record it in both of his only 2 attempts. Considering that Bernadette was leaving Backland for a period, in order not to leave the only recording slot for a demigod-level ability vacant, he had no choice but to reselect and record a demigod-level mystical reenactment. It then took nearly 20 minutes for Syrian to successfully record the mystical reenactment named Spear of Longinus. He strongly suspected that he had been cursed by the puppet from tonight. Hillstown District, a rather famous southern continent-style restaurant. In the dim basement, lit by only a few candles, the puppet, who had previously used a mystical item to steal away the contamination on him and then escaped in front of Syrian, was now curled up before a blood-stained altar. "Oh, Godchild who should not have been born, you are the cage of imprisoned curses, the evil corruption that erodes history. I pray to you, I beg you for some help." In the hoarse, low murmuring, the idol in the center of the altar continuously gushed out pitch black, viscous, seemingly evil liquid. The appearance of these evil liquids instantly caused the surroundings to boil. They continuously spread outwards but were firmly confined within this basement. They covered the ground, surged onto the puppet's body, making his body increasingly stiff, increasingly heavy, gradually becoming a cage for the spirit. After an unknown period, the black, viscous, evil liquid that covered the entire basement finally receded. On the newly exposed floor, walls, and ceiling of the basement, pale skull heads, eyeballs with prominent blood vessels, tongues with sharp fangs, and various grotesque things grew out. They cracked the moment the evil liquid receded, turning into gray-white dust and dissipating into nothingness. Who? The puppet, wearing a black clergyman's robe, with his skin turned sallow and gaunt, and his eyes sunken like a mummy, let out a long breath as if he had come back to life. Apparently influenced by the altar, his temperament also became sinister and cold, as if he could become perverse in silence at any moment. He looked at the altar in front of him with fanatic eyes, prostrated himself on his hands and knees, and loudly praised. "Praise you, Godchild who should not have been born, great messenger of the Mother Tree's oracle." Then he bowed his head even lower. "Praise you, great Mother Tree of desire. I will surely carry out your will and bring that heretic before your idol for judgment." After his conversation with Bernadette ended, Syrian, back in his bedroom, suddenly frowned and turned his head to look at the nearby desk. The black glove, which loved to act like a gentleman, was now lying motionless and quietly on the desktop. It had lost its living characteristics. Chapter 204, It Died. On the wall diagonally opposite the desk, from the distorted painting formed by the remnants and pollution of the revenant Steve, the twisted figure clutching its head in a silent scream emitted a fawning and joyful sound. "Great Master, that glove has lost your aura and power. It died." Syrian looked expressionlessly at the painting on the wall. "You sound quite happy." The twisted figure in the painting shook its head repeatedly, its high-pitched voice as grating and piercing as cat claws scratching glass. No, Master, I'm actually very sad. It's just that I'm not very good at expressing such emotions yet. My merciful Master, if you are willing to bestow upon me the remaining power and aura from that glove, I might be able to undergo some positive evolution and draw closer to you." After a brief silence, Syrian shook his head, refusing its suggestion. "No, you're already very close. If it got any closer, and that grating voice kept ringing in my ears, I'd be afraid I couldn't help but tear it apart." Recalling his thoughts, he took out a glass crystal ball from the cabinet under the desk, holding it with both hands, one above and one below. The transparent crystal ball gradually glowed with brilliant starlight. Immediately, the same starlight was reflected in Syrian's eyes. After a short period of trance, images of what had happened in the room earlier appeared in his mind. The glove, trying its best to act like a gentleman, stood on his desk, seemingly arguing with the distorted, screaming painting on the wall. But, being a gentleman, it clearly had no talent for arguments and quickly became a silent punching bag. As its mood grew more and more dejected, colorful starlight suddenly began to overflow from the glove, and then it visibly weakened. In less than 2 seconds, the glove, as if having lost all its vitality, toppled onto the desktop and never moved again. Meanwhile, the figure in the distorted painting on the wall greedily gazed at the colorful starlight rapidly dissipating in the air, constantly reaching out, but unable to detach itself from the painting. It could only watch this part of the pollution vanish. The scene in his mind ended, and Syrian raised an eyebrow thoughtfully, looking at the distorted, screaming painting on the wall. The figure in the painting shrank its neck back slightly and said in a low voice, "Great Master, I was just arguing with it earlier, really. I didn't think I'd annoy it to death. To atone for my mistake, I voluntarily gave up the alluring, oh no, the painting alluring, power it left behind." Syrian. It has nothing to do with you, the stolen pollution simply reached its time limit. Also, is there still a chance to reshape your personality? The twisted figure in the painting retreated in horror, again and again. "Great Master, I promise I won't make such a mistake again. Please don't kill me." Annoyed by the painting's reaction, he shook his head. Never mind, don't disturb my sleep." With that, he took off his jacket and lay directly on the bed. Behind him, the twisted figure in the painting saluted respectfully. "Yes, Great Master, I will defend your slumber with my life." Syrian. I always thought it was absurd enough that pollutants affected by the true creator like to sing, but it turns out I'm even more absurd. However, the pollution stolen into that glove didn't return to its original owner after its time limit, but instead dissipated directly. Does this mean that the unmated of the Rose school of thought has resolved the problems on her body? She must have sought help from the Son of God, Saya, or the Mother Tree of Desire. The next day, Syrian, still fast asleep, was awakened by the doorbell ringing downstairs. He frowned in annoyance, rolled around in bed a few times before getting up to grab his jacket from the coat rack. "Forgive me, my great, merciful master, I cannot detach myself from the painting itself to influence those people downstairs." Syrian waved his hand, not answering it, and left the bedroom with his jacket. He first went to the washroom to splash cold water on his face to wake himself up, then went downstairs to open the door. Verdu, Owen, and Lawrence entered in single file, each taking a spot on the living room sofa. As Syrian pondered whether this was his home or theirs, Owen thrust 2 brown paper bags into his hands. "Here, I figured you'd still be asleep, so I brought you breakfast." "Actually, you could have waited until I woke up." Syrian's mouth twitched slightly. "Ah." Owen scratched his head awkwardly. "Old gentleman Lawrence said he had something important to discuss with you. He received some revelations last night when he passed through the full moon, with the help of that great existence." As he spoke, he turned his body, directing his gaze towards Lawrence. The latter nodded politely and said, "I apologize, I was a bit impatient. I received a revelation last night. That great existence wants me to help his favored one establish the prototype of a power in Backland. I want to know if this favored one refers to you, and what suggestions or ideas you have regarding this matter." "It's me." After a slight nod, Syrian naturally shook his head. "If I understood these things, this task wouldn't have been outsourced." Owen, who had just learned the specific content of the revelation, looked at Syrian with a mix of surprise and then understanding. "No wonder. I was wondering why your advancement speed was so unreasonable. I thought you were the legendary genius. If you're a favored one of a god, then it makes sense." Syrian ignored his somewhat sour remarks and asked Lawrence, "Do you have any ideas for forming a power?" Lawrence and Verdu exchanged glances, then briefly explained the plan they had formulated overnight. "Verdu and I believe that with the immense power of the church and the military, Backland, which has deep influence in all aspects, is not suitable for the development of a nascent Beyonder power. If we must start here, the best option is to first create a gathering for wild Beyonders, and through slow and hidden development, establish a certain network of connections in Backland, and then select suitable members for development from it. While such development would be slower, it would be relatively stable and less likely to attract the attention and suppression of the authorities." "All right." Syrian nodded, then, after a slight pause, continued. "Then, for now, old gentleman Lawrence, please work on a detailed plan. I will try to gather some Beyonder materials and information about the mystical world to ensure the smooth operation of future gatherings." "Okay." Lawrence nodded, readily agreeing. This discussion went much smoother than he had imagined. When he and Verdu discussed it last night, they had prepared several arguments to persuade Syrian to follow their plan today, but to their surprise, none were needed. As soon as he finished explaining his ideas, the other party simply nodded in agreement. The confidence and pride they had previously speculated a young, rapidly advancing favored one might possess were not evident in Syrian at all. If Syrian knew his thoughts, he would definitely say, "He's not a workaholic, how could he take back work that had been assigned out?" As Lawrence continued to elaborate on the details of his plan, a dense gray fog suddenly surged before Syrian's eyes, and then Klein's voice echoed in his ear. "There's something I need your opinion on. Dr. Allen's luck has been extremely abnormal recently, and last night he had a strange dream. The results of my divination point to the corpse you stored above the gray fog. So, the abnormalities he's been experiencing recently are actually caused by the struggle between the two snakes of fate. What's your opinion on how to handle this matter?" After Klein's voice stopped, Syrian slowly replied. "Simple, you go meet him in Dr. Allen's dream, and everything will be over." Klein: "Why?" Syrian: "He probably wants to see you." After a period of silence from Klein above the gray fog, Syrian saw the gray fog before him quickly recede. That evening, nearing midnight, in Hillsden Borough, at Dr. Allen's house, Syrian and Klein silently emerged from the mirror on the bedroom dressing table. The moment he stepped out of the mirror, Klein pulled a dream charm from his pocket and activated it. Crimson. A deep, tranquil black spread from the silently burning charm in Klein's hand, soundlessly enveloping the entire bedroom, causing Dr. Allen and his wife, who were already asleep, to fall into a truly deep slumber. After doing this, he turned to Syrian. "Can you enter dreams and remain conscious within them?" Syrian pondered and said, "I can try to open a door leading to the dream world." Chapter 205, The Giant Snake in the Dream. Can a dream, also, open a door? Klein's eyes were full of doubt and curiosity. He always felt that the apprentice potion the other party consumed was not the same type as Miss Magician's apprentice potion, otherwise, the difference would be too great. Syrian nodded in response, "Theoretically, yes, but I don't know if I can do it. After all, I am only a sequence 6. Klein suddenly felt Versailles. Ignoring Klein's speechlessness, he asked with some curiosity, "Why did you insist on bringing me along?" Klein answered honestly, "Judging from the fact that you could obtain Will Anseton's body, you must be quite familiar with the Snake of Fate. I thought bringing you along would probably be safer. And with you here, traveling will be very convenient." At this point, Klein suddenly remembered the last time he was stopped by patrolling police on his way home at night and found to have a gun on him. In the end, it was his neighbor, Lawyer Jurgen, who bailed him out. Thinking of Lawyer Jurgen, he thought of Mrs. Doris, who had recently fallen ill and was hospitalized. Perhaps the vampire from the Harvest Church could treat Mrs. Doris. Coincidentally, Miss Justice sent me another sum of money this month, well, to my dependents. I can try to purchase the thousand-faced hunter's mutated pituitary gland from the sanguine. Syrian looked at the somewhat distracted Klein and pouted, "I think you're overthinking it. Bringing me might actually be more dangerous." Klein, having regained his focus, shrugged at him, "Anyway, we're already here." As he spoke, he pulled out another charm and chanted the incantation to activate it. Crimson. A deep, quiet darkness fell like twilight, silently covering Dr. Allen, Syrian, and himself. Then he quickly entered a meditative state, using his spirituality to touch the oval light sphere representing Dr. Allen's dream. Syrian, seeing this, also quickly entered a meditative state. Then he saw in boundless deep darkness, and he saw the oval light sphere quietly suspended before him. After a moment of thought, he extended his right hand and gently pushed forward. As his spirituality vibrated, circles of ethereal blue ripples spread across the oval light sphere, finally congealing into the shape of a vague, illusory door without any substantial form. On the other side of the door, he saw a barren plain, a towering black spire, and a silver-white long snake coiled around the spire. It seemed to sense something, raising its head, its crimson eyes coldly gazing at Syrian outside the door. Noticing the undisguised oppression and disgust in the giant snake's gaze, Syrian hesitated for a moment but ultimately decided to go in. After all, he was already here. Moreover, the advantage was with him now. A snake of fate that had restarted but had not yet been born could only glare at him if it was annoyed. With that thought, he took a step forward and crossed into the door. The surrounding world suddenly inverted, then twisted back. When he clearly saw his situation, he found himself on the barren plain he had seen earlier, with dark, stone ground beneath his feet, devoid of even a single blade of grass. Not far in front of him, Klein and a man in a white coat were approaching the central spire. Syrian quickened his pace to catch up, and under the giant snake's increasingly malicious gaze, as if it could attack at any moment, he entered the spire. The interior layout of the spire was extremely chaotic. It seemed that direction and space no longer strictly applied here. After walking some distance behind the somewhat dazed Dr. Allen, Syrian suddenly reached out and grabbed Klein. Under the latter's confused gaze, he pointed to the decayed wooden door they had just passed and said, "Let me lead the way. Following him is too slow." With that, he took 2 steps forward, reached out, and gripped the rusty handle on the wooden door, closing it, then opening it again. With one close and one open, the scene behind the door abruptly changed. The originally slanted staircase turned into a dimly lit room, where a small figure was huddled in a corner. Seemingly noticing the suddenly opened door, the person curled up in the dim corner looked up, their ink-black eyes filled with undisguised disgust and fear. "You, don't come over, don't eat me." Perhaps due to being too agitated, he suddenly stood up, then lost his balance and fell to the ground. Klein, following behind Syrian, finally got a clear look at him. A sturdy-looking little boy, about 1.4 meters tall, somewhat thin, with his left lower leg missing. More importantly, he was identical to the corpse Klein had stored above the gray fog. The snake of fate, Will Anseton. However, judging from his previous reaction, Klein suspected this was just a dream image and had no relation to the real Will Anseton. While he was thinking, Syrian had already walked up, somewhat roughly lifted the little boy from the ground, and then said, "Stop pretending to be a child. I have something to ask you. I saw Ouroboros earlier. He wanted to give me some luck, but he failed in the end." HMPH. The little boy, held in his hand, grunted and interrupted him, then bit his hand. Hiss, Syrian reflexively threw the little boy he was holding. "Oh, you." Klein looked at this scene with some exasperation, instinctively reaching out to catch the little boy Syrian had thrown, but before his hand could touch the other party, the two strangely missed each other. After missing Klein, the little boy landed perfectly in the arms of Dr. Allen, who had walked all the way up the stairs to this point. He looked at Dr. Allen, who had instinctively reached out to hold him, with a mix of surprise and joy, his voice so panicked he was almost crying. "Dr. Allen, a bad person wants to eat me." No sooner had he spoken than a huge, silvery white snake head stretched over, its blood-red mouth, devoid of teeth and tongue, biting at Syrian. Splash! The moment he was touched by the giant snake in the dream, Dr. Allen's dream seemed to reach its limit and quietly shattered. In the instant the deep darkness swallowed everything, Syrian suddenly reached out and tore open an illusory door in the shattered dream. A faint blue light, carrying the bodies of Syrian and Klein, flashed and vanished. After a period of chaotic disorientation, as if being thrown into a washing machine, Syrian and Klein arrived in a small, oppressive, dark dream space filled with the sound of rushing water. Klein frowned, looking around. He didn't know why, but he now uncontrollably wanted to curl up his body. "Where is this?" Another dream hidden within Dr. Allen's dream. As he spoke, Syrian raised his hand and lightly rubbed his fingers, creating a soft light around them that allowed them to see normally. As the light illuminated their surroundings, an empty baby carriage, covered with a silver blanket, appeared before them. As the two looked at it, a line of mercury-colored small words appeared in front of the baby carriage. "What an impolite fellow. Don't you know it's very rude to disturb an unborn baby? If you cause me to suffer from developmental problems after birth, I will draw many circles to curse you." Syrian pouted and whispered, "Even Ouroboros couldn't affect my luck." In front of the baby carriage, a new line of words appeared. "But I have the probability of a pan." Seeing the dialogue between Syrian and the baby carriage, Klein seemed to understand something and quickly asked, "Was Dr. Allen's previous abnormal luck your doing? Will he continue to be unlucky afterwards?" In front of the baby carriage, words filled with strong displeasure appeared. "You can just ask this rude fellow such a question." Splash! An illusory shattering sound rang out. Syrian felt as if he saw a slowly rotating silver ring, or perhaps a silver long snake biting its own tail. When he came back to his senses, he found himself back in the bedroom, staring at Dr. Allen and his wife sleeping soundly in bed, one hand still in the posture of pushing a door. He awkwardly withdrew his hand, then turned to look at Klein, who had also just regained his composure, and shrugged, saying, "Let's go. The unborn little baby doesn't think highly of us." Klein was suspicious for a moment. "Why do I feel he only dislikes you?" Syrian, while opening the door to the mirror world through the mirror on the dressing table, said with a smile. "It was originally like that, but you insisted on dragging me along, so now he dislikes both of you." Speechless for a moment, he then asked, "Do you know what happened with Dr. Allen's previous bad luck?" Syrian nodded slightly and explained, "The Snake of Fate's restart is a reversal to an embryo, starting everything from scratch. An infant naturally needs parents to be born. As for Dr. Allen's previous bad luck, that was just a necessary price." Just a little. Klein was highly skeptical of that qualifier. He knew very well the extent of Dr. Allen's previous bad luck. "Isn't it?" Syrian turned and pointed at the sleeping Dr. Allen. "Look at him now. Has his body, life, and work not been affected at all? Compared to the luck he will gain in the future, that bit of bad luck before is insignificant." Welcome to Fanfic Audiobook, your go-to place for immersive audiobooks. If you enjoy the content, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to our channel for more amazing stories. And please support the author by link in description. Chapter 206, The New Week's Gathering. In the early morning, in a daze, Syrian felt a gray fog surging before his eyes. The fool sat high above the gray fog, looking down at him. "The transaction for the Crimson Moon Crown has been completed. You can take the mystical item containing the Gatekeeper characteristic at any time, or receive it through a ritual of sacrifice and bestowal. Also, this is the exact location of that ruin in the outskirts of Backland. There's no detailed information, only that it's very dangerous. None of the Beyonders who discovered and explored this ruin before have come out alive." As he spoke, a red light rose from within the gray fog, finally condensing into a very detailed map of Backland, with an enlarged red dot appearing in the lower reaches of the Tassoc River in the outskirts. Syrian rubbed his eyes, forcing himself to stay awake as he said, "I understand." Above the gray fog, Klein, who had established a connection with Syrian through the corresponding illusory star, seemed to be infected by this scene and couldn't help but yawn. Miss Sharon came a bit too early. It's just dawn. I'll go back to bed and sleep a little more." Muttering to himself, he severed the connection established by the illusory star and then left the space above the gray fog. After the gray fog in front of him receded, Syrian turned over in bed and continued to sleep. It wasn't until the dim morning outside the window was replaced by bright sunshine that he finally yawned and got up. On the wall next to the desk, the distorted figure in the hanging painting said flatteringly, "Great Master, someone broke into your home while you were in slumber, but I, who vowed to defend your sleep to the death, have quietly dealt with him." Broke in, dealt with. Syrian was momentarily bewildered, then Haven's face, which was almost identical to his own, suddenly popped into his head. No, with a face so similar to mine, this flattering broken painting wouldn't have the guts. Shaking his head, he collected his thoughts and then asked with some curiosity, "What kind of intruder, where, and how did you deal with him?" The distorted figure in the painting seemed to have rehearsed it thousands of times in his mind, answering fluently and concisely. "A flexible, agile fellow, very weak, but with a mystical item that could hide himself in shadows. Great Master, thanks to the power you bestowed, and your foresight in hanging those paintings in this house beforehand, I can freely appear in any of them, providing some trivial security for your home. To avoid disturbing your slumber, as soon as that ignorant, despicable, and pitiful intruder appeared, I immediately taught him a lesson. Now his spirit body has been injured by my shriek, and he is currently unconscious in the stairwell. If there's a gathering in the future, you can sit at the same table with Klein's sycophantic mirror." After a brief moment of distraction, Syrian nodded slightly. "Well done." The distorted figure bowed earnestly. "It is my honor to be of service to the Great Master. I will defend my work to the death." After a moment of silence, he went to the washroom, washed up, changed his clothes, and then came to the stairwell to check on the intruder mentioned by the screaming painting. At the corner of the stairwell, a human-shaped object wrapped in a black cloak lay on the ground. He didn't go forward himself, but first observed it with his spirit vision. Not dead, but not far from it either. The aura of the etheric and mental bodies on the human-shaped object was exceptionally dim, almost like that of a severely ill patient or a mentally handicapped person. He had originally intended to interrogate and extort the person before sending him directly to the police station, but now, Xiang felt that if the police officers saw the guy's miserable state, he would first be charged with negligent injury. In a picture frame hanging in the stairwell, the distorted figure appeared like a visitor in a golden flower sea painting, whose background was extremely discordant with it. Great Master, are you thinking about how to deal with this damned intruder? Perhaps, you could let me turn him into a zombie. Xiang sternly rejected his suggestion. I don't like corpses, and I especially don't like moving corpses. After a moment of thought, he took a gold coin from his pocket and flicked it into the air with a ding sound. After a few flips, the gold coin landed precisely back in his hand, face up. Looking at the divination result in his hand, he decided to temporarily throw this unknown intruder into the attic on the 3rd floor and have the figure in the screaming painting watch him. A low-sequence Beander, with no additional dangers on him. In this house, he was the most harmless little animal, at the bottom of the food chain. After dragging this unconscious intruder, who was currently breathing more out than in, to the attic on the 3rd floor, he also brought over the screaming painting from his bedroom. Help me keep an eye on him. Notify me when he wakes up, I have some questions to ask him. If he tries to escape, you can scare him, but you must not scare him to death or kill him. The distorted figure, no problem, your loyal servant will complete this mission to the death. Xiang, you don't have to the death, all the time. This isn't that difficult. The distorted figure, but this represents my determination and will to follow you forever. After a moment of speechlessness, Xiang turned and left the attic. At 3 in the afternoon, as the wall clock in the room chimed on time, a dense gray fog continuously emerged before Xiang's eyes, followed by a fleeting crimson light that engulfed his vision. After a brief daze, when his vision cleared again, he was already inside the magnificent and ancient palace above the gray fog. After everyone appeared almost simultaneously on both sides of the mottled long table, Justice Audrey was the first to rise, curtsying to the fool at the head of the table. Good afternoon, Mr. the Fool. After a slight pause, she turned to look at the others and greeted them one by one. Good afternoon, Mr. Hanged Man. Good afternoon, Mr. Fate. Hearing Miss Justice's light and cheerful greeting, Xiang, who had been a little distracted, instantly snapped back to attention. After nodding to her, he casually remarked, "It sounds like Miss Justice is in a very good mood today." Justice Audrey smiled and replied, "Yes, I will share my recent gains and progress with everyone later." Then she keenly noticed that her friend, Magician Furs, was constantly shifting her gaze back and forth on Xiang, seemingly in a conflicted state of wanting to ask something but not knowing how to start. Furs's main concern wasn't the death of Cap'n, nor the Black Emperor vigilante. Had she encountered anything else after last week's gathering, something related to Mr. Fate? Or had she discovered that the Black Emperor vigilante was actually related to Mr. Fate? Amidst her swirling thoughts, she heard the Hanged Man Alger's slightly humble voice. Respected Mr. the Fool, I have collected 3 new pages of Rosal's diary. The Fool Klein, at the head of the table, smiled and responded. What do you wish to exchange for them from me? The Hanged Man Alger turned his head to look at Xiang and hesitated before asking. Mr. the Fool, may I transfer the contribution of these 3 pages of the diary to Mr. Fate? I wish to use them to offset part of the value of the wind-blessed potion formula. He paused, then added to Xiang, Mr. Fate, do you agree? I have no objections. Xiang shook his head slightly. After all, these were things Mr. the Fool was collecting. Although their specific value was hard to estimate, and almost worthless to him, he couldn't refuse. It was a matter of attitude. Unless Mr. the Fool personally rejected the idea of transferring contributions, but clearly Klein had no such intention. Collecting his thoughts, he asked with some curiosity. So the valuable information you mentioned earlier was actually Rosal's diary? Alger shook his head slightly. No, that's just one of them. He didn't explain in detail, planning to save the topic for the later trading session. Then, with the help of Mr. the Fool, he successfully materialized the 3 pages of the diary he had memorized. Soon, 3 yellowish-brown parchment papers came into the full Klein's hands. He leaned back leisurely in his chair, lowering his gaze as if casually. March 15th. I really am the protagonist. With just some archaeological clues and folk legends, I found the phantom ship left by the Solomon Empire, the ancient, Black Emperor's throne, at the edge of the Fog Sea. After quickly reading the 3 pages of the diary, he also discovered a page that had been casually pieced together and forged using the symbols from Rosal's diary. Indeed, every world has a counterfeiting industry. Chapter 207, The Hanged Man's Probing. Making the diary he had materialized disappear, Klein casually tapped the edge of the table and said leisurely, "You may begin." Hearing Mr. the Fool's words, the hanged man Alger immediately turned to Syrian. "Do you need any valuable intelligence from the sea?" Syrian also looked at Alger and asked back, "What type of intelligence?" Seeing the hanged man and Syrian already conversing, the son Derek opened his mouth, then fell silent. Thinking that today's gathering had already begun, he was no longer as anxious as before. The hanged man Alger noticed Derek's behavior, but he was more focused on his own matters at the moment, so he didn't pay it any mind. He merely glanced at him before retracting his gaze, then carefully chose his words and said, "Some more secretive information about pirate kings, pirate generals, as well as the distribution of various forces at sea, and clues to certain sea treasures." When he mentioned sea treasures, he paused intentionally, his gaze calm but unblinking as he watched Syrian, observing his reaction. The latter shook his head slightly. "Sorry, I don't need this information. As for clues to sea treasures, if they were truly effective, and not too difficult or dangerous, I imagine you would have already taken them, wouldn't you? Of course, if it's about clues to sea treasures like the Ghost Empire or the Lost Nuans, we can trade." The hanged man Alger shook his head, his tone full of helplessness. "A treasure like the Ghost Empire, even just a hint of a clue, its value far exceeds a wind-blessed potion formula." Although his tone sounded helpless, his mood at the moment was very pleasant. Syrian's reaction and answer just now confirmed to him that the other party had not obtained information about that primitive island from Kilangos. This was something he had been worried about ever since Syrian sold him the wind-blessed Beander characteristic from Kilangos at the Tarot Club. Killing and communing with spirits is something most capable Beyonders would do, especially since Kilangos, as a pirate general, must have had many secrets, as well as his personal treasures. Communing with his spirit after killing him would surely yield considerable gains. Before, he never had a suitable excuse to inquire about this indirectly. This urgent need for the wind-blessed formula after digesting the Seafarer potion just happened to become the opportunity for his probing. It must be that Archbishop God-Singer Ace Snake was chasing Kilangos too closely at the time, and that Death Consul, after killing Kilangos, did not choose to commune with his spirit, but rather left directly after obtaining the extracted Beander characteristic. Now that primitive island is truly a secret known only to me. In that case, I can consider selling the last mystical item I have, or directly using it to trade for the wind-blessed potion formula. For me now, improving my strength is the top priority. I must be strong enough to explore that primitive island, and it also serves as a good conclusion to this probing. As thoughts flickered, he looked at Syrian and said, biting his lip, "I still have a mystical item, and combined with the contribution of those 3 pages of Rosal's diary, its value is equivalent to the wind-blessed potion formula, and even exceeds it." Syrian raised an eyebrow, thoughts swirling in his mind. I knew it. How could just a wind-blessed potion formula make the hanged man choose to exchange it for the coordinates of that primitive island? That's his biggest, well, now second biggest, secret. All those words before were just an act, to probe whether I had communed with Kilangos, and whether I had obtained information about that primitive island. It seems my performance was better, allowing him to successfully lower his guard. Thinking of this, Syrian couldn't help but curve his lips, feeling quite pleased, but his expression remained unchanged as he said, "I need to know what kind of mystical item it is." The hanged man nodded, then organized his words slightly and said, "It's a golden mask, with roughly outlined facial features, characteristic of ancient jungle primitives. Its Beander effect is that wearing it makes one extremely calm, without emotional fluctuations, while also gaining extremely strong regenerative abilities, exaggerated speed, and excellent strength. and mastering certain black magic and primitive curses, roughly at sequence 7 level of power. The negative effect is that as the number of uses increases, the wearer will become less and less human, more and more ruthless, eventually seeing themselves as a god. The value of this mystical item is between 2,500 and 3,000 pounds. Even if it's only used to exchange for the wind-blessed formula, it's an equivalent transaction. Syrian nodded slightly. You're absolutely right. But as the party in demand, I can always raise the price, so this mystical item, even with the contribution of those 3 pages of Rosal's diary, is still equivalent. The hanged man, magician, is raising the price, something to be proud of. Why did Mr. Fate say it so righteously? Fool. Degree 2. What you said makes sense, but next time, don't say it. Justice. Equals 1. The conversation between Mr. Hangman and Mr. Fate earlier seemed to have a probing meaning, and the change in his attitude before and after was a bit stiff. This mystical item must have been a trade condition he had prepared long ago. So, Mr. Fate noticed it and responded accordingly. As her thoughts wandered, she noticed the son Derek, who was out of place among the curious listeners, seemingly distracted. To break the slightly solidified atmosphere, she took the initiative to ask. Mr. Sun, you seem to be troubled by something. Did you hear anything important from the former exploration team captain next door again? Hearing Miss Justice's concerned inquiry, the son Derek shook his head. He's already dead. Dead? Justice Audrey was a little startled. Magician and the hanged man, who were paying attention to the same topic as her, showed similar reactions. Although that former exploration team captain had a high probability of having become Amon's avatar, he had been imprisoned for decades without showing any abnormality, and they had just discussed him last week, only to be told this week that he was dead. For a moment, they all wondered if there was something wrong with themselves. The hanged man Alger, who reacted the quickest, immediately pressed, did Eamon, who was parasitic in that former exploration team captain, discover you? Then he exposed a problem, but was then cleansed by the holy relic of your city of Silver's round tower. The son Derek looked at the hanged man Alger, who had already roughly pieced together the situation, with some surprise, nodded, and then explained in detail. It was something like that. After the gathering ended, I had just woken up in my room's bed when I heard the former exploration team captain, who was possessed by Eamon, speaking behind me. He asked me how I recognized him, and he also sensed the presence of Mr. the Fool. Although Derek didn't have a talent for storytelling, Justice, Magician, the Hanged Man, and even Mr. the Fool himself, felt like they were watching a horror movie alone late at night. Syrian looked around at the stiff figures, whose breathing had even quieted down, and whispered a reminder. Friendly reminder, you're just listening to a story, you can breathe normally. Everyone. After a brief silence, everyone on both sides of the mottled long table simultaneously stretched their bodies, pretending to be relaxed. Magician Furs looked at Syrian directly opposite her and complained in a low voice, Mr. Fate, you're really a mood killer. Syrian smiled and asked back, unconcerned, but aren't you less nervous and scared now? Furs's expression stiffened for a moment. Although her inspiration in her mind had been interrupted, she had to admit that after this interruption, she was indeed no longer nervous or scared. Seeing the tense atmosphere broken, Klein manipulated his alt account, World, and asked, what happened next? Which elder saved you? Derek looked at World in surprise, amazed and astonished that everyone could guess the general situation from just a few words of his. Is this the rich experience and meticulous logical deduction that Mr. Hangman mentioned? I wish I were that good. After a slight sigh in his heart, he replied, then the chief appeared in time and used the holy relic of the round tower to deal with Eamon, who had intruded into my room. Chapter 208, Sun Training Class. Hanged Man Alger looked at Derek and pressed with a serious expression. You were just imprisoned next to the former exploration team captain, and he immediately lost control. Did your chief not question such a coincidence? Also, are you sure you weren't parasitized by Eamon during this process? Derek nodded and answered earnestly. The chief did question me about what happened before and the reason for that former exploration team captain. I described everything except for attending the gathering. As for why the former exploration team captain next to me lost control, My answer was that I speculated it was because the sun pathway I chose stimulated Aemon, causing him to expose himself. The chief confirmed I was fine and then let me leave directly. Alger's brows furrowed deeper as he listened. Your chief just let you leave like that? Ah, yes. Derek nodded, a little puzzled. Seeing that Mr. Hanged Man didn't press further, he continued to narrate. After returning home, I prayed to Mr. Fool and told him everything. Afterward, Mr. Fool had me perform a mystical ritual and sent his angel to purify the Aemon that had parasitized me. Hanged Man, you prayed to Mr. Fool immediately after returning home. Justice, Mr. Fool's angel. Magician, you were parasitized by Aemon. The reactions of the Tarot Club members varied, but they all showed the same shock. The Hanged Man, who was closest to him, almost took a fighting stance. World and Syrian also showed some surprise, though their performance wasn't very convincing, but no one was paying attention to them at this time. Derek nodded, then continued. After the former exploration team captain, who was parasitized by Aemon, was dealt with by the chief, a strange-looking small worm was left behind. It was thumb-sized, with alternating transparent and opaque segments, a total of 12. After the Aemon that parasitized me was purified by Mr. Fool's angel, I also coughed up a similar small worm. Do you know what this is? Magician and Justice and others subconsciously looked at Syrian. The latter said without hesitation, it's a worm of time. This is the name of a Sequence 1 Deander potion from the Marauder pathway, and also part of their mythical creature form. You can probably imagine it is an aggregate composed of countless small worms like the one Mr. Sun just described. Magician Furs and Justice Audrey imagined that scene in their minds according to his description, then their bodies suddenly stiffened, their hairs stood on end, feeling both disgusted and afraid. They experienced what it was like to have trypophobia for the first time. At the very top of the mottled long table, the Fool Klein, hidden by the gray fog, also stiffened slightly. It wasn't because of the image of large masses of worms in his mind, but as a pathway adjacent to the Marauder, he was a little worried that he might also turn into some strange worm aggregate in the future. Perhaps because the image in their minds was too shocking, for a moment no one asked what a mythical creature form was. Recovering from the imagined scene of countless invisible Aemon coiling around him, Derek twisted his body uncomfortably, then curiously asked. Mr. Fate, what use is a dead worm of time? Syrian, auxiliary material for certain Deander potions, or a component of certain rituals. Of course, for us, there are better ways to utilize it. He paused, and under everyone's curious gazes, he turned his head to look at the very top of the mottled long table. Perform a ritual, and pray to Mr. Fool. The Worm of Time can be made into powerful high-level charms. The effects of charms made with the Worm of Time include, but are not limited to, stealing fate, defrauding rules, parasitizing targets, depriving Deander abilities. After Syrian finished speaking, Klein immediately manipulated his alternate persona, World, to ask. Mr. Sun, are you selling your Worm of Time? This was not simply about powerful high-level charms. He needed to first master the corresponding techniques to ensure he could respond effectively when others prayed. With World's question, others also looked at Derek, thinking about what they could use for trade. The powerful effects of the high-level charms made from the Worm of Time, as described by Syrian, moved all of them. Under the complex gazes cast upon him, Derek shook his head slightly. Sorry, I don't plan to sell that Worm of Time for now. Syrian reminded him in a timely manner. Although the Worm of Time's remains are very useful, what's more important for you now is to consider how to gain your chief's trust. Hanged Man Alger also continued. Indeed, your best choice is to find a suitable opportunity and reason to hand it over to your City of Silver's chief, or to the person secretly monitoring you. Why? Derek hadn't quite reacted yet. Alger shook his head slightly, then explained, it's simple. You've had an encounter with Aemon, who can silently parasitize others. Can your chief truly completely trust you after only one check? Your reason for explaining why Aemon, who had been quiet for 42 years, suddenly became violent after your arrival is also very clumsy. What's more, you prayed to Mr. Fool immediately after returning home, and then performed a mystical ritual. These things must have been exposed to those monitoring you. In your chief's eyes, even if you haven't been parasitized by Aemon, you are now a similarly dangerous person. There's no need to doubt this. This is necessary caution, otherwise your city of silver wouldn't have been able to endure until today in such a harsh environment. This. Derek's eyes gradually widened, and his originally calm heart also gradually became flustered. Gulp. Then, what should I do? Syrian said thoughtfully, confess, or maintain the status quo. I personally lean more towards the former. After all, you've shown too many flaws. Instead of letting your chief continue to suspect you've been parasitized by Aemon, it's better to confess some of your peculiarities in exchange for some trust. After all, you are just using your own methods to save the City of Silver. Through us, you have indirectly connected with the outside world, haven't you? By doing this, although you will still be suspected and monitored to some extent, as long as you don't have a major problem like wanting to destroy the City of Silver, I think your chief will turn a blind eye, and even help you with some things. But, Derek opened his mouth, then swallowed the words he was about to say. He instinctively believed that secrets should be hidden, but now he felt that Mr. Fate's words made a lot of sense. Noticing Derek's hesitation, Syrian added, your City of Silver has endured in the darkness of the forsaken land of the gods for over 1,000 years. I think your chief knows better than anyone that maintaining the status quo will only lead to destruction. Will it really be like this? Derek was visibly stunned for a moment, somewhat disbelieving. Justice Audrey thoughtfully explained to Derek. I think Mr. Fate means that your chief will, to a certain extent, accept anomalies that are harmless or less harmful to the City of Silver. For example, you, and also the former exploration team captain whose anomaly hasn't truly erupted. This is also a form of probing, or rather, an attempt to connect the City of Silver with the outside world. Is that so? Derek frowned, murmured for a while with his head down, then turned to look at the blurry figure in the gray fog at the top. He wanted to ask Mr. Fool for some hints, but for a moment he didn't know how to speak. Noticing the son Derek's gaze, the Fool Klein pondered and then spoke leisurely. Only you can save yourselves. Derek pursed his lips with a complex expression, but just relying on us, can we really do it? The Fool Klein tapped the edge of the table with a finger, and said with a smile. Isn't the help you've received from the Tarot Club also the result of your own efforts? Effort with external assistance is also a form of effort, but you must discern your goals well and be prepared to pay the corresponding price for it. Derek hung his head, his brows tightly furrowed, and the Tarot Club fell silent with him. After a long while, he looked up again at the Fool at the top and said, I understand, Mr. Fool. Thank you for your hint. The Fool Klein, shrouded in gray fog, nodded slightly at him, though he didn't know what the other party had understood. The re-energized Derek looked around and then his gaze fell on Syrian. He asked with sincere tone, Mr. Fate, if I choose to confess some of my secrets to the chief, how can I gain his trust? Should I just say it directly? Syrian thought for a moment in his mind, finding that he couldn't come up with a very good answer, so he threw the question to the two who were better at this aspect. I think you should ask Miss Justice, who is a spectator, and Mr. Hanged Man, who is very experienced in this area. Chapter 209, The Fool's Revelation. Hearing Syrian's reply, son Derek turned his gaze to Hanged Man beside him and Justice and others across the long table. Before he could speak, Hanged Man proactively said, we need to know more detailed information, and this includes what has happened in your City of Silver recently. Only by considering all circumstances can we give the most detailed judgment. Justice Audrey suspected that Hanged Man merely wanted to seize the opportunity to inquire about some intelligence. However, knowing more information was indeed more beneficial for her analysis, and she herself was very interested in the matters of the City of Silver, so she did not interrupt. Derek nodded slightly, then spoke of another recent incident in the City of Silver that he found concerning. The exploration team previously led by Shepherd Elder Luvia has returned. They have completed their exploration of the True Creator's half-destroyed temple. Because there were several team members I knew well among them, I went to the isolation plaza to pick them up. I found that their personalities had all undergone certain changes. Syrian frowned, then said with great certainty. They have all been corrupted by the True Creator. After discussing the topic of the light of the soul with Adam, he had a clearer understanding of this kind of contamination from a higher level. The minds of the corrupted are the easiest and quickest to mutate. Physical mutation and loss of control require time to ferment, or more contamination, but contamination from the true creator would probably be different, because he holds the authority of mutation. Changes in the mind and physical mutations are very likely to occur simultaneously. Derek pursed his lips, wanting to retort, but the horrifying smile from the isolation plaza subconsciously flashed in his mind, and he ultimately held back. After a moment of silence, he asked in a somewhat somber tone. Are they still salvageable? Hanged Man said without a ripple in his tone. Describe their changes in detail. If the situation isn't severe, perhaps there's still hope. It's just that the probability of, perhaps, occurring is negligibly small. In all records of the Storm Church, anyone who had come into contact with an evil god, whether Beander or ordinary person, never had a good end. Even if they appeared safe, even if they were under the strict protection of the Punishers, the final outcome was still to fall into madness or lose control and collapse. Justice Audrey subtly glanced at Hanged Man. From his tone, she sensed that this answer might just be to comfort Mr. Sun, but she felt it was better not to point it out at this moment. Derek recalled his feelings at the time and described them as clearly as possible. They looked no different, yet they were vastly different from before. The optimistic ones became somber, and those with bright smiles were left with only polite smiles. Also, when facing them, I inexplicably felt like I was facing those monsters in the darkness. This is your spiritual intuition giving you a warning. Sirian's tone remained certain. After a pause, he explained. The Sun pathway is most sensitive to powers in the domains of darkness, corruption, and defilement. However, you are limited by your sequence, and the abnormality on them was not directly apparent, so you could only produce some premonitions at the sensory level. If the abnormalities on them have accumulated to a certain extent, you only need to summon a holy light, and their problems will be directly exposed. Can I? Derek's eyes lit up. He felt that as long as the problems with those people were exposed, the chief would believe what he had said before. Hanged Man silently shook his head, then poured cold water on him. If you really do that, your chief might think you're the biggest problem in the City of Silver. After a pause, he added, if you want to exchange honesty for your chief's trust, then directly tell him about the true creator. You don't need to be too certain or too detailed. He will definitely find a way to verify it himself, and you can also use the opportunity to gradually gain his trust. You can also expose the existence of Mr. Fool to a certain extent and emphasize that Mr. Fool, Amon, and the true creator are in an antagonistic relationship. Out of necessary caution and checks and balances, with Amon having already appeared, the true creator having already affected the exploration team, and even an elder, your chief will not refuse to contact your Mr. Fool, at least not explicitly. Of course, I personally still recommend that you conceal your special circumstances. The risk of being honest is too great. According to the current situation in the City of Silver, you can completely use those members of the exploration team corrupted by the true creator to put on a performance and gain the chief's trust. I need to think about it. Derek buried his head in distress. Mr. Hanged Man leans more towards self-preservation. He seems to have an innate distrust of large organizations. Mr. Fate, on the other hand, leans more towards a certain degree of honest cooperation to gain support. As for Mr. Sun, he lacks sufficient experience and is wavering between two contradictory suggestions. Actually, I think what they both said makes a lot of sense. Justice Audrey's gaze moved back and forth among the three people across the mottled long table, recalling her past understanding of everyone, and then analyzing their approximate current situations. Mr. Hanged Man sometimes wears the robes of the Storm Church. He most likely comes from the Storm Church, but is not valued or even ostracized. This can also be seen from his reliance on the Tarot Club's channels to collect potion ingredients and formulas. He subconsciously believes that his application for promotion to the church is likely to be rejected, or he has plans to secretly leave the church. Based on his own situation and understanding, Mr. Hanged Man would believe that his secrets should not be exposed, so when faced with a choice like Mr. Sun's, he would lean more towards self-preservation. As for Mr. Fate, he is either in a very good organization, like our Tarot Club, with a strong sense of identity, or he has received focused training from an organization in similar matters. I feel it's more likely the latter. He has shown great erudition in mystical knowledge, especially regarding Beander pathways, and his promotion speed is also very fast. He has likely become a core member of a certain Beyonder organization. Amidst various thoughts, Audrey heard Mr. Fool tapping the table. Is Mr. Fool going to give a hint about this matter? She quickly turned her head to look at the head of the mottled long table. Seeing everyone's gaze directed at him, Fool Klein leaned back slightly, looked at Derek, and said leisurely. There is no single correct choice, only the most suitable choice. And no matter which choice you make, your ultimate goal is to save the City of Silver. All choices are just a way for you to strive. But you seem to have forgotten that saving the City of Silver is not your responsibility alone. Derek opened his mouth blankly, but didn't know what to say. Fool Klein, shrouded in gray fog, chuckled and further elaborated. Perhaps you can go talk to your chief, whether it's Amon's problem, the true creator's problem, or your own problem. In many matters, he is more knowledgeable and experienced than you, isn't he? When necessary, you can appropriately reveal some information about me. Son Derek, after pondering, bowed sincerely. I understand. Thank you for your revelation, Mr. Fool. After a slight pause, he turned to the others at the Tarot Club and sincerely thanked them. Thank you, everyone. Mr. Fate, Mr. Hanged Man, and Miss Justice, thank you. Syrian withdrew his gaze from Klein, constantly sighing in his heart. As expected of someone who can perfectly role-play the fool, this art of speaking is very much worth learning. I just don't know if the Saphira Castle's influence is involved. Collecting his thoughts, he turned to son Derek and reminded him. Before you go talk to your chief, it's best to learn the art of language from Miss Justice or Mr. Hanged Man first. The same content, expressed in different words, will have different effects. Of course, you don't need to learn too much, otherwise your chief will see that you are just a tool for relaying messages. Chapter 210 Free Communication. That's no problem. Audrey slightly raised her chin. If it had been before this week, she would have been unsure about similar questions, but after the invitation from the psychology alchemists, she felt she had grown a lot in dealing with such individual versus organization situations. The Hanged Man, Alger, also responded. I can also offer some advice, but only advice. When you're actually communicating, you'll have to judge the specific situation yourself. I understand, thank you everyone. Derek thanked them sincerely again. Then Justice taught Derek some language skills. Not only Derek, but everyone in the Tarot Club listened very carefully. The careful teaching from a spectator made everyone understand what truly high emotional intelligence communication was like. Afterward, the Hanged Man also taught Derek some conversational skills, and only then did the lesson for son Derek truly end. Seeing that the matters concerning Old Gentleman's son and the City of Silver had concluded, Magician Furs quickly looked at Syrian and asked. Old Gentleman Fate, how did you deal with that old gentleman? That old gentleman from the Abraham family, who mastered the apprentice pathway. Lawrence. He's still alive, Syrian replied casually. What does, still alive, mean? Furz's expression stiffened. Her excellent imagination as an author had already conjured images in her mind of Lawrence being imprisoned in a dark basement, being beaten and interrogated for information about his family. Shaking her head to dispel the images, she spoke again. I want to know his current situation. Is he safe, or free? After a pause, she added, he only came to Backland to find his relatives, he had no ill intentions. Syrian nodded slightly. I know, so I sent him to meet his clansmen. Besides, isn't your imagination a bit too rich? Furs awkwardly lowered her head, constantly grumbling internally. It's not my fault your answer just now was so ambiguous. Composing herself, she asked again. Then why did you say, still alive, just now? Did he, Old Gentleman Lawrence, encounter any danger? Didn't you notice before? Syrian counter-questioned. Without waiting for her to explain, he answered himself. He has serious hidden injuries and is burdened by a bloodline curse that erupts every full moon. Coming to Backland to find relatives and receiving bad news, after multiple blows, his life is already nearing its end. A bloodline curse that erupts every full moon. Furz's expression changed. She thought of the full moon mumbling she had experienced. Old Gentleman Fool said this was a cry for help from a certain existence. If this is the same as the bloodline curse of Old Gentleman Lawrence's family that Old Gentleman Fate mentioned, then the one emitting the full moon mumbling is actually an ancestor of Old Gentleman Lawrence's family. Thinking this, she could no longer control her emotions and quickly pressed on. Old Gentleman Fate, I want to know the information about Old Gentleman Lawrence's family and the bloodline curse you mentioned. I am willing to exchange it for one chapter from Spirit World Observations. Although it's considered the ramblings of a madman, based on my few experiences entering and exiting the spirit world, many of its descriptions are true. Yes, that's acceptable. Syrian nodded thoughtfully. Do you need to communicate privately, or should I just say it directly? Magician Furs pondered for a moment before replying, just say it like this. In her opinion, neither Old Gentleman Lawrence's family nor the bloodline curse they carried was useful information for the other members of the Tarot Club. This would not cause her any loss. On the contrary, after understanding the situation, others might even help her keep an eye out for similar information. Syrian looked at Magician Furs with some surprise, then answered her question. Old Gentleman Lawrence is a member of the Abraham family. This is an angel family that mastered the apprentice pathway, ranking first among the great nobles of the Fourth Epic Tudor Empire. During the War of the Four Emperors in the Fourth Epic, after Blood Emperor Alistair Tudor fell and the Abraham family's ancestor also disappeared, a bloodline curse appeared on them that would erupt during the full moon and blood moon. The bloodline curse on them manifests as hearing terrifying mumblings that are unbearable, leading to loss of control and madness. The higher the sequence, the clearer and more terrifying the mumblings heard. Because of this, the Abraham family currently has no Beander who has surpassed sequence 7. To avoid risks, they had to split into small families and scatter across various regions. So, I contracted the Abraham family's bloodline curse because I used that bracelet from the Abraham family. For a moment, an emotion called regret filled Furz's chest and mind. After a while, Furz, having recomposed herself, took a deep breath and nodded to Syrian. I understand. Thank you for your answer, Old Gentleman Fate. I will copy the first chapter of Spirit World Observations after today's gathering and offer it to Old Gentleman Fool. Is that acceptable? Syrian nodded slightly, yes. Knowing that Old Gentleman Lawrence was fine and her confusion about hearing full moon mumblings was resolved, Furs suddenly relaxed. Unfortunately, given Old Gentleman Son's current situation, I estimate it will be some time before I can obtain a Soul Eater's stomach. Perfect, I can use this time to save some money. I'll also need to buy deep-sea spearfish blood later. As her thoughts drifted, she suddenly heard the Hanged Man's voice. Miss Magician, I recently obtained a clue for deep-sea spearfish blood. Do you still need it? I do. Furs, snapping back to attention, quickly replied. At worst, I'll borrow some money from Viscount Glaint or Miss Audrey to tide me over. I can pay it back once my manuscript fees for this month arrive. After a brief exchange between Magician Furs and Hanged Man Alger, the Tarot Club fell silent. Then, at the prompt of Fool Klein, the gathering entered the free communication segment. Syrian's gaze swept around, then he was the first to speak. Aemon came to Backland last week, which later drew the Lord of Storms' divine punishment, destroying many of his avatars. Well, one could also say he only lost some avatars. Aemon shouldn't be coming back for a while, so those of you in Backland can feel free to go out. Was that the lightning from that day? Justice Audrey asked thoughtfully. The city-wide lightning that day, without wind or rain, was memorable. The most recent lightning strike was only 2 streets away from her home. She remembered that the official explanation given afterward was non-compliant building materials and a massive static electricity outbreak in the air, with casualties occurring. Now, she realized those casualties were likely Amon's avatars. Magician Furs and Hanged Man Alger also looked over curiously. One was curious and apprehensive about Aemon appearing in Backland, while the other was curious about the Lord of Storms unleashing divine punishment. Yes, Syrian nodded but offered no further explanation. Seeing that Syrian would not explain further, Hanged Man Alger had no choice but to ask Miss Justice, who was also in Backland. What kind of lightning was it? Justice Audrey recalled for a moment before saying, I was in my room at the time, so I didn't see it very clearly, I could only judge by the sound and flashes. The lightning frequency was very high, but not dense. It continuously struck various places in Backland, mainly concentrated on the south bank of the Tassoc River, lasting for about half a minute. Magician Furs added, I was in the Backland Bridge area at the time, and I even saw spherical lightning fall from the sky, but it was just a flash. Son Derek imagined such a scene in his mind and found that it was not as terrifying as the occasional thunderstorms in the City of Silver. But seeing everyone's serious expressions, he remained silent. After a period of silence, Justice Audrey ended the somewhat somber topic. Last week, an interesting case occurred in Backland, featuring a protagonist known as the Phantom Thief, Black Emperor. As she spoke, her gaze subtly swept over everyone, but she didn't observe the reaction she wanted. Except for the bewildered old gentleman's son, everyone else, even the gloomy and reserved world, subconsciously glanced at old gentleman fool at the very top. This indicated that everyone thought similarly. The Phantom Thief Black Emperor was not among them, but more likely one of old gentleman fool's dependents. Chapter 211, Versailles. She paused slightly, then continued her narration. The victim was Ka Ping, a not-so-famous wealthy man, who was identified as Backland's biggest human trafficker. After he was killed by the vigilante, Black Emperor, officials rescued many innocent young girls from the dungeon of his villa. When Ka Ping's body was discovered, it was covered in tarot cards, most notably the Judgment and Emperor cards covering his face. After finishing her story, she turned her head to look at the blurry figure shrouded in gray fog at the head of the table, and asked with great curiosity. Mr. Fool, is leaving tarot cards at the scene a signature of our tarot club's actions? The Fool, Klein, glanced at the curious crowd and said in an indifferent tone. Hey, it's a little habit of one of my dependents, and later it received the approval of most of them. If there are actions that require your participation later, you can also leave your own tarot card. We can too. Audrey's eyes lit up, her voice filled with unconcealed excitement. She seemed to have already envisioned a future where she left a tarot card, attracting widespread attention and discussion in both real life and the mysterious world. Syrian raised his hand at the appropriate moment, and after getting everyone's attention, he said, I left a tarot card at a certain scene in the outskirts of Backland 2 days ago. Now, it has probably been secretly investigated by punishers led by a high-ranking deacon in the Machinery Hivemind squad. I just wanted to divert attention at the time. This can be considered a lucky coincidence, I suppose. A lucky coincidence. I don't believe you. You just guessed the identity of the vigilante, Black Emperor, early on and wanted to pin it on me. Klein fully trusted his intuition, then he manipulated the alternate persona, world, and pressed. What did you do? Syrian stretched his neck, then replied. I encountered a rose school of thought demigod with ill intentions. We fought, but there were no casualties. However, the traces of curses and pollution at the scene were too heavy, making the problem obvious at a glance, so I left a tarot card. After a brief silence of a few seconds, the people on both sides of the mottled long table finally reacted. You encountered a demigod from the Rose School of Thought. You fought a demigod and managed to escape alive. That's a half-human, half-god existence. How did you do it? After a momentary silence, he replied. Is it possible that the demigod from the Rose School of Thought ran away first? Impossible. The hanged man, Alger, immediately shook his head. The gap between a demigod who has gained divinity and an ordinary Beander is even greater than the gap between Sequence 9 and Sequence 5. This is a gap in the level of life, which is difficult to bridge even with powerful mystical items, because they only need a glance, or an aura derived from their inherent characteristics, to make an ordinary Beander lose the courage to act. Are demigods that powerful? The magician, Furs, clicked her tongue slightly. As a wild Beander who had always been active at lower levels, her understanding of demigods was limited to easily obtainable rumors. Justice Audrey was equally curious. In some respects, she was even more of a novice than Furs. The topic of demigods reminded Klein of the former in Zangwill, and he suddenly felt a dull ache in his chest. After 2 seconds of silence, he manipulated, whirled, and said. Beyonders at the demigod level have already acquired divinity. At this point, they have both a human side and a divine side. That's no longer a gap that can be bridged simply by numbers, tactics, weapons, or mystical items. He paused, then turned his head to Syrian, adding word by word. I don't recommend you provoke demigods like Mr. Fate. His Beander pathway is quite special, and he has his own opportunities and ways to entangle with demigods and escape, but you cannot. Upon hearing this, Justice, Magician, Hanged Man, and Son all looked at Syrian. According to Mr. World's explanation, fate, Syrian's encounter with a demigod seemed different from what they had guessed. It sounded like Mr. Fate had actively provoked the demigod, and then successfully escaped. Noticing everyone's gaze, Syrian curved his lips and nodded lightly. Although there was an element of trickery, I did manage to barely defeat that Rose school of thought demigod at the time. Everyone else. 0. Klein. Not at all sophisticated, but extremely effective Versailles-style statement. After a moment of silence, Alger was the first to ask. How did you do it? He had always thought he was the most knowledgeable tarot club member about demigods, besides Sun, but now he suspected he only knew a little more than the two ladies opposite him. The son, Derek, was also very curious. The chief's previous strike at the bottom of the round tower to clear out an Aemon clone had left too deep an impression on him. Even with the amplification of a holy artifact in that strike, the chief's power was still beyond his reach. Amidst many curious gazes, Syrian carefully chose his words and said, I recorded a somewhat special demigod-level Beander ability and used it to pollute that Rose school of thought demigod, then I dragged it out with him for a while. To prevent the pollution from deepening and causing him to lose control, and to avoid being discovered by official demigods who might rush over, he ran off on his own. He paused, then added, the higher the sequence of a Beander, the more unstable their mental state, especially since the Rose school of thought are a bunch of guys who indulge their desires. After he finished speaking, there was another moment of silence from everyone. Although he spoke concisely, even somewhat casually, after the Hanged Man and World's popular science explanation of demigods, even the magician Furs and Justice Audrey, who had little concept of demigods, could imagine the danger involved. The Hanged Man, Alger, spoke in a low, hoarse voice. Even if his condition was poor after being polluted, he was still a demigod with the ability to instantly kill ordinary Beyonders. The fact that you could contend with him until he had no choice but to actively withdraw from the battlefield due to his own condition is itself a testament to your strength. If this happened at sea, this event could make your renown reach or even surpass that of a veteran pirate general in an extremely short time. After speaking, he suddenly fell silent, silently re-evaluating Syrian's position in his own mind. The strongest combat force in the Tarot Club, besides Mr. the Fool. From his demonstrated erudition and rapid advancement, it's clear that besides the Tarot Club, he must have other forces behind him, and he should be a core member of that force, perhaps even a favored one by a god. This exaggerated rate of advancement, even I, after mastering the acting method, cannot achieve, only those favored by a god. As everyone fell silent, lost in their own thoughts, the fool, Klein, lightly tapped the edge of the table in front of him and said leisurely, regarding the Ka Ping incident that, Justice, mentioned earlier, my dependents acquired two Beander characteristics. He hopes to sell them as soon as possible to exchange them for funds for future activities. The two Beander characteristics correspond to a sequence 8 feet sheriff, and a sequence 7 feet interrogator, respectively. A sheriff, and an interrogator. Isn't this a Beander pathway controlled by the Loan royal family? Only royal family members, the military, and special organizations controlled by the royal family can obtain it. Is the Ka Ping incident related to the royal family or the military? But how is that possible? Justice Audrey couldn't help but frown, a flurry of thoughts appearing in her mind, only to be dismissed by herself. The Hanged Man, Alger, thought similarly, though his suspicions also included the Castia family of Phenobot. As they were lost in thought, Syrian raised a hand and looked at Mr. the Fool at the head of the table. If I buy both Beander characteristics, how much will they cost? Klein hesitated for a moment, ultimately choosing the latter between extorting a large sum and offering a discount. 1,600 pounds. Deal. Syrian immediately agreed to the transaction. Since he intended to establish a Beander faction, such resources were essential. Even if Klein raised the price, he would still buy them, at most he would just verify the other party's intentions offline. It wasn't until the transaction was completed that the magician, Furs, belatedly asked, what is a Beander characteristic? Finally, she added, I can exchange other chapters from Spirit World Sightings for the answer. She instinctively felt that this answer was quite important, perhaps a high-level piece of hidden knowledge in the mysterious world. Syrian turned his head to look at the fool, Klein, at the head of the table. He didn't intend to answer himself. After establishing a connection with the Abraham family, he no longer lacked knowledge like spirit world sightings. He had agreed to the other party's transaction earlier solely to allow Miss Magician to learn about the Abraham family, facilitating future contact. Since he planned to gradually establish an organization by forming a Beyonder gathering, recruiting wild Beyonders like Furs, who had lived in Backland for many years, was a very good start. After a brief silence, Justice Audrey proactively spoke. Mr. Fool, I can help you answer this question. The payment will still be made directly to you by Miss Magician. All right. The Fool, Klein, nodded slightly. He really didn't want to explain it a second time. It didn't fit his identity as the Fool. Indeed, only Miss Justice was the most considerate. And also very rich. Chapter 212, Respective. After receiving the Fool's approval, Audrey, in good spirits, began to explain Beyonder characteristics to Furs. In the Beyonder world, there is such a law. The total amount of Beyonder characteristics within similar pathways is conserved, it will neither increase nor decrease. It will only transfer from one thing to another, transforming from one state into another. So, after a Beyonder dies, the characteristics they obtained by consuming a potion will precipitate out. This might combine with certain nearby objects to form a mystical item, or it might recoalesce into pure Beyonder characteristics, which is equivalent to the main ingredient for a potion of the corresponding sequence. Syrian added after Justice Audrey finished her explanation. If it's a sufferer of mental incision, or someone with extremely strong emotions, or someone who has been corrupted, then the precipitated Beyonder characteristics will also carry corresponding hidden dangers. Beyonder characteristics that precipitate after a Beyonder dies are equivalent to the main ingredient for a potion of the corresponding sequence. But if the Beyonder was corrupted before death, the precipitated characteristics will have hidden dangers. A flash of lightning seemed to cross Furz's mind. She finally understood the real reason she heard the full moon's whispers. The Beyonder characteristic I used to become an apprentice came from Mrs. Annalise, and the characteristic Mrs. Annalise used came from her husband's legacy, from a member of the Abraham family burdened with a bloodline curse. The Beyonder characteristic I used to become an apprentice inherently had hidden dangers. It wasn't until later, to avoid danger, that I used the bracelet from the Abraham family, causing this hidden danger to fully erupt. If I had been more cautious then, not putting myself in danger, I wouldn't have used that bracelet, and even more, I wouldn't have fallen deep under the influence of the full moon's whispers. Of course, she wouldn't blame Mrs. Annalise for this, the other party clearly didn't know these things either. Moreover, if she hadn't been deeply affected by the full moon's whispers and found it unbearable, she wouldn't have prayed to Mr. the Fool at that time, and she wouldn't be joining the tarot club now. This can also be considered my special encounter, I suppose. After a while of wandering thoughts, she finally belatedly remembered that she had missed her friend Zio needing a sheriff Beyonder characteristic. Never mind, I don't have enough money to buy it now anyway, so missing it is missing it. After the small interlude, it was Hanged Man Alger's turn to share his observations. Recently, someone at sea spotted the dawn of the Queen Mystic. It appeared in the Sonia Sea not far from Loan, then entered the raging sea, suspected of heading to the southern continent. Queen Mystic. After a brief moment of surprise, everyone turned curious gazes towards Hanged Man Alger, awaiting his further narration. Alger shook his head slightly. It was only a brief sighting, no one dared to rashly follow the flagship of a pirate king. However, the Storm Church has reacted strongly to this. A high-ranking deacon has already entered the raging sea. During this period, ships traveling between the northern continent and the southern continent via the safe passage through the raging sea will probably decrease. Although the dawn is relatively friendly among pirates, no one wants to be the object of that friendliness. Afterward, Magician, Furs, Son, Derek, and World under Klein's control also shared some of their observations. Then everyone collectively tutored Derek for a while, until Mr. the Fool announced the end of today's gathering. Streaks of deep red light rose, engulfing all vision. After a brief sensation of weightlessness, Syrian found himself back in reality, in his own bedroom. After waiting for a moment, the familiar gray fog appeared before his eyes, and then he heard the Fool Klein's voice. Mr. Hanged Man, has already sacrificed that mystical item to me. You can now trade the wind-blessed potion formula with him. No problem. After a slight nod, Syrian raised his hand and snapped his fingers. Under the influence of the fog creation and telekinesis tricks, faint white mist appeared out of thin air, then writhed as if alive, outlining lines of words in midair. Main ingredients: 6 crystallized feathers of a blue shadow falcon, a pair of dragon eye sea eagle eyeballs. Auxiliary ingredients. Above the gray fog, Klein, witnessing this scene, twitched the corner of his eye slightly. Quite a show-off. Why doesn't magician have such simple and practical spell-like abilities? We're all part of the circus, after all. After muttering softly, he interceptioned the image of Syrian displaying the wind-blessed potion formula and cast it into the illusory star representing Hanged Man. Sonia C., Azure Avenger. Alger, pacing back and forth in the captain's cabin, suddenly stopped. Dense gray fog appeared in his vision, and deep red light rose within the grayish-white mist, quickly solidifying into an image. In the image, a blurry figure of a gentleman raised his hand and snapped his fingers, after which white mist appeared out of thin air, continuously intertwining, forming several lines of words in midair. After quickly jotting down the words that appeared in the image, Alger placed his hand on his chest, bowed his head slightly, and respectfully saluted the magnificent figure above the gray fog. Respected Mr. the Fool, I have recorded the entire wind-blessed formula. Thank you for your help. I hope you will have become a wind-blessed when we meet next week. The Fool's voice, tinged with a hint of a smile, echoed slightly in his ears, then the gray fog before him quickly receded, as if nothing had ever happened, leaving no trace. Alger clenched his fists and looked towards the increasingly close dock outside the window. The auxiliary ingredients needed for wind-blessed are not too troublesome, and I arrived at the Rorstad archipelago early. In 3 days at most, I will be able to gather all the materials and proceed with the advancement. City of Silver shrouded in darkness. Derek stood up from the head of the bed. Using the light from the lightning outside the window, he quickly scanned his surroundings. Neither his sight nor his spiritual intuition detected any signs of being monitored. But after the collective reasoning of the Tarot Club members, he believed that the chief, who had sent him home, must have someone secretly watching him. It was just that he was not good at finding people and observing, making it difficult to discover the person secretly monitoring him. After a moment of hesitation and mentally cheering himself on, Derek strapped the hurricane axe, which was on the table, to his waist and then directly left the house. After Derek walked out of his house, the shadows in the corner of the room he had just been in writhed. After a brief darkness, the lightning's glow illuminated the room again, and a tall figure appeared before the square wooden table. His gaze quickly swept around Derek's room, then he looked at Derek's rapidly receding back, and his body once again merged into the shadows. After transmitting the wind-blessed potion formula to Hanged Man, Alger through the Fool, Syrian was not in a hurry to hold the ritual of seeking a boon. Instead, he planned to wait until Miss Magician had finished copying the spiritual world anecdotes before holding the ritual to acquire it. Afterward, he went straight to the attic on the 3rd floor. The figure in the screaming painting had not reported the condition of the unconscious intruder to him. He somewhat suspected that the person might have already turned into a corpse. Upon seeing Syrian, the figure in the painting respectfully and guiltily saluted him. "Great Master, your loyal servant greets you. I have been diligently watching this timid fellow. He woke up a few times, but each time he just opened his eyes and fainted again." Syrian's gaze moved between the screaming painting hanging on the wall and the person lying on the ground, whose face was so pale it lacked any trace of blood. After a brief silence, he sighed, pressing his hand to his forehead. "My mistake, I shouldn't have hung you in a position where he could see you as soon as he opened his eyes. How could a low-sequence Beander, whose spirit body has suffered an impact and is in a weakened state, possibly withstand the mental shock of directly looking at you?" The distorted figure in the painting repeatedly waved its hands. "No, how can this be considered your mistake? One can only blame this fellow for being too weak." Syrian did not reply, merely silently turned the painting face down. "No, Great Master, I can't see you anymore. Master, please hang me in a different direction. My vision cannot be without you." Ignoring the noisy sounds of the screaming painting, Syrian half-crouched and reached out to pat the cheeks of the unfortunate fellow lying on the ground. A faint blue light spread through his palms. With each pat, a thin layer of ice crystals was left on the other party's cheek. Under the stimulation of the low-temperature frost, about 10 seconds later, the unfortunate fellow lying on the ground weakly opened his eyes, his pupils dilated, looking like he had suffered a major blow and his mind had collapsed. Chapter 213, The Reason. Help, help me. There's a ghost, take me to the church, I need to go to the church. Help me. What an ignorant fellow. How could I be a low-level creature like a ghost? The painting, hanging upside down on the wall, grumbled curses. The man lying on the ground immediately widened his eyes, his body stiffening in place. He looked like he was about to faint again. Whack! Syrian shook his hand, looking at the man whose right cheek had a red mark and who had regained his senses. He nodded in satisfaction. Before I send you to the church, please tell me why you broke into my house. Your answer will determine your fate. You shouldn't be so naive as to think that police officers from the Public Order Bureau will investigate your disappearance, right? The man lying on the floor had a stiff expression on his face. He opened his mouth, but before he could make a sound, he was interrupted by the painting hanging upside down on the wall. Great Master, you could actually choose to commune with spirits. That way, you'd get the answers you need, and you could also guarantee their authenticity. As for the remaining corpse, I can turn him into a zombie. Although he's a bit weak and a bit ugly, a flesh and blood body existing in reality would allow me to serve you better. The stiffness and endurance on the man's face quickly faded, leaving only fear and unease. Cough. No, I would never lie, truly. He was so flustered that his words were a bit slurred. Syrian nodded slightly, stood up, and took a step back, gesturing for him to continue. He pursed his lips, which were chapped from not drinking water for too long, and his throat bobbed twice before he continued. 2 days ago, at a Beander gathering, I accepted a commission to steal something. The reward was a full £300, and the target was a certain item in this house. I don't even know exactly what to steal. The person who posted this commission gave me a small, red paper figure. He said that as long as I got close to the item, this paper figure would react. I observed this area for several days and confirmed that only a young man who left early and returned late lived in this house. So, after he left today, I secretly snuck in. At this point, he couldn't help but look up at Syrian, his eyes filled with nothing but panic and regret. He had hesitated before. A theft commission worth £300 couldn't possibly be simple, but these £300 were too important to him. Coupled with the fact that he had a mystical item that could hide in shadows, he decided to take the risk. But he never expected that as soon as he snuck in, he would encounter a terrifying ghost attack, pass out directly, and finally be caught red-handed by the owner of the house. Syrian calmly observed him for a while, then a gold coin popped out of his hand with a clink. After using divination to confirm that the other party wasn't lying, he said, "Take out that paper figure." "No problem." The man on the floor nodded repeatedly, then took out a crimson paper figure, as if soaked in blood, from the inner pocket of his jacket. Syrian took the paper figure in his hand and examined it carefully, then gently rubbed his fingers together, igniting it. In the crimson flames, the palm-sized paper figure disintegrated into a crimson moonlight. Moon, sanguine. After a soft murmur, he tossed the gold coin in his hand again, performing a simple divination. The gold coin spun a few times in midair before falling back into his hand, face up, indicating affirmation. Hearing his previous mumble, the painting hanging upside down on the wall immediately declared, "Great Master, do you need me to help you teach those ignorant sanguine who dare to covet your treasure a lesson? You talk when you can walk out of the painting." After speaking, he looked down at the man who remained lying on the floor, not daring to move, and asked calmly, "The sanguine who commissioned you should have told you how to contact him after you stole the item, right?" The man's face twisted into a smile uglier than crying. Seeing that Syrian could divine, his last bit of thought about shifting all the blame to the person who posted the commission vanished. "I didn't know he was a sanguine at the time. But he left me an address, a manor on the outskirts of the North District. The specific address is..." After hearing the address the man reported, Syrian couldn't help but raise his eyebrows. He was very familiar with this address, and had even been there not long ago. It was precisely the manner where the sanguine Marquis Nibis slept. Nibis certainly wouldn't go to such lengths. If I really had something he needed, he would have many better options than having an unreliable thief steal it. Even outright snatching it would be better than stealing. As his thoughts drifted, a person, or rather, a sanguine figure, popped into his mind, Nibus's grandson, Cassimi Adra. He knew that Cassimi Adra possessed a mystical item containing the characteristics of a scarlet scholar and coincidentally had a need for it, having previously tried to purchase this item from him through Nibis. This sanguine baron had every reason and motive to do this. Collecting his thoughts, he looked down at the man on the floor. I originally wanted to keep you to lead the way, but now it seems unnecessary. I already know who the sanguine who issued this commission is. The man on the ground's pupils constricted abruptly, and he quickly said, "Wait, I'm useful. I can help you lure him out. If you rashly confront him, you will definitely provoke an entire sanguine clan. But if it's just him, you can totally make a move secretly and then frame me. Afterwards, as long as I leave Backland, escape to the sea, escape to the southern continent, even the sanguine would have a hard time finding me." Syrian looked down at him, asking with a half-smile. "And I would also have a hard time finding you, wouldn't I?" The man on the ground chuckled dryly and shook his head. "How could that be? You can divine. As long as you keep some of my personal belongings, you can easily find me." Syrian waved his hand, skipping that question. "How to deal with that sanguine is my business. Let's first talk about the compensation." The man nodded repeatedly. "No problem, what do you need me to do for you?" Speechless for a moment, Syrian bent down and pulled off the black cloak tied around the man's body. "This mystical item is mine, as compensation for the losses incurred by your unauthorized entry into my home. I didn't even get to do anything. Where did the losses come from? This is clearly robbery." The man looked at him with a stiff face, and finally, under Syrian's emotionless gaze, he gritted his teeth and nodded with a pained expression. "All right, good." Syrian smiled and nodded. "Finally, regarding whether you can keep what you've seen and heard today a secret." The man on the ground, "Secret, I will absolutely keep it a secret. I can swear to the Lord of Storms that I will not reveal a single detail about today's events to anyone." Syrian ignored him and said to himself, "Repeat after me, in ancient Hermes language. From the unknowable exalted. From the unknowable exalted. The door above the dimensions. The dimensions." The words the man was repeating suddenly stopped. He looked at Syrian with a face full of terror, even with a hint of pleading. Is this an evil god?" Syrian nodded noncommittally. "Theoretically speaking, any existence other than the 7 gods is an evil god. If you recite this honorific, you might have a terrible fate later, or even die, but if you don't recite it, you will die now." The man nodded with a bitter face. I'll recite it. From the unknowable exalted, the door above the dimensions, the embodiment of art and fantasy. Syrian nodded slightly. After completely reciting the honorific that pointed to himself, he looked at the man sitting on the floor, his face full of bitterness, conflict, and despair. The latter repeated Syrian's recently recited honorific in a halting voice, with several seconds between each phrase. From the unknowable exalted, the door above the dimensions, the embodiment of art and fantasy. After hearing the ethereal prayer echoing in his ears, Syrian nodded to him, then pointed towards the door behind him. "You may leave." The man looked at the door behind Syrian, his eyes lit up, and he quickly got up, but because he had been lying down for too long, his legs were numb, and with too much movement, he stumbled and fell back onto the floor. After sitting on the floor and recovering for a while, he finally stood up shakily, fleeing as if a ghoul were chasing him. The attic was quiet for a moment, then the painting hanging upside down on the wall suddenly spoke. "Great Master, I don't think this ugly, weak fellow is a qualified servant. At least, power like mine, and loyalty, would be your best choice. He's not my servant. Also, you're coming out with me." As he spoke, Syrian took the painting down from the wall. "Great Master, where are we going?" To give that sanguine baron a sufficiently profound warning. 2. Chapter 214, Warning. South of the bridge, Harvest Church. Before giving Cassimi Adra a profound lesson, Syrian first sought out Father Utravsky. "Father, I need to record a few more Storm of Light, and preferably add Dawn armor and Sword of Dawn. The payment can accumulate for now, I'll bring it to you all at once next time." Father Yutravsky nodded gently, his expression unchanged. All right, but you'll need to wait a while. I need to finish today's prayers first. No problem. Syrian nodded and found a random bench at the back of the hall to sit on. City of Silver, top of the round tower, inside Chief Colin's room. Knock, knock. The sound of knocking suddenly echoed. Colin, seated behind the long table, glanced towards the door and said in a deep voice. Come in. Click. Derek pushed open the door and entered. After reclosing the door behind him, he approached Chief Colin's desk and placed a small worm with 12 transparent segments on the tabletop. A flicker of surprise passed through Colin's deep, weathered light blue eyes, then his gaze fixed intently on Derek, and he asked calmly. What do you want to tell me? Derek pursed his lips, the images of Justice Audrey and Hanged Man Alger teaching him conversation skills flashing through his mind. He took a deep breath, then said, This is a worm of time that Eamon uses to create avatars. Previously, when Chief Yu cleaned out that Eamon avatar at the bottom of the round tower, he silently parasitized me. However, it was later discovered when I prayed to another existence. That existence gave me a mystical ritual, and after I performed it, an angel under his command purified the Eamon avatar that had parasitized my spirit body. This worm of time was spat out after the Eamon that parasitized me was cleaned away. Another existence. Colin stared intently at Derek, a complex dark green symbol appearing in his light blue eyes. Derek nodded slightly, a hint of uncontrollable sadness in his voice. Yes, it was after I personally ended my parents' lives. At the time, I was very confused, and my mental state wasn't good. I kept praying and begging to God. I don't know which one of those prayers connected me to Mr. Fool. Mr. Fool. Colin frowned, trying to find any trace of this existence in his memory, but ultimately found nothing. After a pause, he looked at Derek, who had stopped speaking due to his interruption, and nodded almost imperceptibly. Continue. Derek nodded, continuing his narration. Later, Mr. Fool pulled me into his divine kingdom, and I joined a regular gathering held there. Everyone there, besides me, lives in a world with sunshine and a sea. Some of them come from the sea, and some come from a place called Backland. I mentioned the City of Silver and its surroundings to them, and they called this place the Forsaken Land of the Gods, saying it's a place even the 7 deities couldn't find. Colin suddenly stood up, the dark green symbols in his eyes continuously splitting, finally emitting a faint glow, and he looked at Derek with extreme pressure. Are you sure? Colin's sudden movement made Derek a little flustered. He shook his head helplessly. I'm not sure. In Mr. Fool's divine kingdom, one cannot see the outside world, but there's no reason for them to deceive me. And what? Colin's tone softened, and he sat back down in the chair behind him. The oppressive feeling from the chief disappeared, and Derek let out a sigh of relief before continuing. And I paid attention to their conversations and exchanged some information about the outside world with them. Whether it was observations from the sea, events happening in cities, or complex interpersonal relationships, none of it seemed fabricated. Colin sighed and shook his head. Have you forgotten all the general knowledge courses you've taken? Those dangerous evil gods can silently influence and corrupt a person, turning a normal person into a lunatic without them realizing it, and they might even believe they are the ones who are correct. Derek pursed his lips, and after a long while, he finally uttered. I know, but Mr. Fool is not an evil god. Colin shook his head, not dwelling on the issue. If Derek had truly been corrupted by the evil god called Fool, how could he have sobered up with just a few simple words from him? If he hadn't been affected by an evil god, saying these things would be even more useless. He raised a hand to rub his brow, then asked casually. Did you come to see me today about the issue with the exploration team led by Livia that you reported earlier? The sudden change of topic caught Derek off guard. Miss Justice and Mr. Hanged Man didn't say what to do in this situation. After a brief moment of panic, he composed himself and nodded seriously. Yes, I learned from a member of that gathering that the half-destroyed Temple Elder Livia's team is exploring belongs to the true creator. This is a true evil god, and he and his followers have caused many bloody incidents in the outside world. One member even mentioned to me that the true creator's true body resides in the Forsaken Land of the Gods. Moreover, the true creator happens to control the secret supplicant pathway, which Elder Livia belongs to. In his temple, she will inevitably be affected. I have seen the returning exploration team members, they have already been corrupted. Colin stared at Derek with a serious gaze, asking word by word. How are you certain? Derek immediately replied. The sun pathway is particularly sensitive to the power of darkness and corruption. I felt an inexplicable unease after approaching them. After a slight pause, he added, we can go to the plaza to verify with the exploration team members who are still in isolation. Colin looked at Derek, whose youthful innocence had not yet fully faded from his face, and warned him seriously. If they haven't been corrupted by your so-called true creator, do you know what the consequences will be for you? Derek gritted his teeth and said firmly, I am willing to bear the risk. Colin nodded slightly, strapped the 2 straight swords he had beside him onto his back, then walked towards the office door. Follow me. All right. Derek quickly responded. Outskirts of North Backland, the Audra family manor. Shimmering starlight flew out from the void, swiftly outlining a slightly ethereal stargate, and then Syrian stepped out from within the stargate. As the stargate appeared, a group of sanguine bats, existing between reality and illusion, flew out from within the manor. They circled Syrian once, then reassembled in midair, transforming into a tall, slender, handsome male. He wore a long, black-on-red tailcoat, its coattails swaying in the wind. He had a tall, upright figure, light, almost silver hair, and a pair of eyes as red as concealed blood. He slightly raised his chin, observing Syrian with a condescending gaze. Is it you? Are you here for Lord Nibis, or do you seek the help of the Sanguine? The other party's prideful demeanor made Syrian frown slightly, but the spiritual light, as striking as a red moon in the night sky, and the subtly unsettling oppressive feeling, all told him that this was a true demigod. Besides Nibis, who had to continue his life in slumber, there was actually another demigod here. It seemed that giving Cassimi Audra a profound warning today wouldn't be too smooth. Collecting his thoughts, he asked the demigod opposite him, who liked to look down on people. You know me. The sanguine demigod opposite him nodded slightly. The ancestor rarely sends down such detailed divine oracles. Currently, all high-ranking sanguine in Backland know you. In other places, the sanguine dukes and some marquises who haven't fallen into slumber also know. After a pause, he repeated his previous question. Are you here for Lord Nibis, or do you wish to obtain the help of the sanguine? Syrian shook his head slightly. Neither. I'm just here to give a warning to a sanguine who tried to steal from me. Impossible. The sanguine demigod immediately denied his words. We sanguine disdain to do such a thing as stealing. Syrian was not surprised by the other party's reaction and explained calmly. What if it was an item containing a Scarlet Scholar characteristic? What if he was a baron who had been struggling without a characteristic for advancement? The answer from the spirit won't lie, and neither will my divination. The sanguine demigod frowned. Although he wanted to deny Syrian's words, due to his identity, he still asked. Who is it? Syrian turned his gaze behind him. There, Cassimi Audra. A flicker of panic crossed Cassimi Audra's eyes, but he quickly composed himself and retorted sharply. I haven't left the manor these past 2 days. Earl Mistral can vouch for me. Furthermore, even if you are the person mentioned in the ancestor's divine oracle, you cannot casually slander a sanguine baron like this. He slightly emphasized his tone when mentioning the sanguine. In front of him, the sanguine demigod named Mistral subtly glanced at him, then looked at Syrian, and nodded calmly. Cassimi isn't lying, he indeed hasn't left here these past 2 days. Syrian shook his head slightly, his gaze passing over Mistral to Cassimi behind him. I didn't say when the theft occurred, nor did I say he personally came to commit the theft. Mistral frowned, and enduring his patience, asked. What evidence do you have? I just said, I came to give that sanguine a warning, not to discuss this matter. As he spoke, Syrian extended his right hand, grasping at the air. In each of his eyes, a phantom, slowly turning book was reflected. I came, I saw, I recorded. In his outstretched right hand, an ancient-styled, dark red spear materialized out of thin air, with clusters and specks of bloody color burning from its tip to its hilt. The Lance of Longinus. Chapter 215, Brief Skirmish. The moment the dark red spear appeared, it was as if a ladle of cold water had been poured into a calm oil pan, and the atmosphere instantly became tense. Cassimi Audra retreated in surprise and alarm, while sharply saying, What do you want to do? This is where my grandfather sleeps. Syrian didn't speak, he just silently pointed the tip of his spear at him. A sharp, biting aura, as if it could pierce through the void itself, rushed forward, and Qasimi's words immediately caught in his throat. He swallowed repeatedly, gulping down the saliva secreted from tension, and his calves trembled uncontrollably. Enough, that's enough. I will personally investigate this matter for you. Mistral stood between the two with a deep frown, shielding Qasimi behind him with his body, his gaze wary as he looked at the dark red spear condensed in Syrian's hand. The Shaman King's intuition told him that even if he was a demigod whose life level had undergone a transformation, he would still be severely wounded by this spear. Of course, this was assuming he took the spear head-on. As the Shaman King, he had dozens of ways to easily evade such a simple attack. But Qasimi behind him couldn't evade it. He couldn't let Lord Nibues's grandson die in front of him, yet Syrian was a key figure in the Ancestors' Oracle, so he couldn't directly use violence to harm the other party. In desperation, he could only stand between the two, attempting to mediate. Syrian didn't respond, he merely pushed the spear forward in his hand, locking his spiritual perception onto Qasimi behind Mistral. The next second, a somewhat illusory deep red full moon appeared in midair, and the crimson moonlight fell like a thin, invisible veil, filtering out the light from the sun, plunging the surroundings into a full moon state where spirituality thrived and spiritual perception was enhanced. At the same time, the dark red spear in Syrian's hand flew out, shooting forth like a dark red lightning bolt, swift and fierce. Mistral's body dematerialized, stained a light red, turning into a hazy moonlight. The released dark red spear instantly pierced through it, shattering it, and finally transforming into countless red scales that dissipated on the spot. Qasimi, who had been shielded by Mistral, instantly turned pale. The potion's professor's not-so-powerful spiritual intuition keenly felt the crisis of death at that moment. The dark red reflected in those crimson eyes gradually approached and magnified. Before he could react, the dark red spear had already pierced through his head. The spear of Longinus, like a blood-colored lightning bolt, after successively piercing through the moonlight that Mistral had transformed into in Qasimi's body, plunged into the ground of the manor, leaving a bowl-sized, immeasurably deep black hole. Qasimi's body, after being pierced, quickly twisted, contracted, and finally turned into a palm-sized, headless Shaman King puppet. Substitute puppet. Syrian merely glanced at it before retracting his gaze. He wasn't surprised by this scene. After all, every demigod of the Sanguine was skilled in substitution spells, and Qasimi was fortunate enough to have a marquis grandfather. Mistral, whose body reformed in the moonlight, looked at this scene angrily. You, HMPH. Even a key figure mentioned in the Ancestors' Oracle cannot attack a Sanguine without cause. As he spoke, Syrian's reflection appeared in his crimson eyes. As he reached out and wiped his eyes, a deep, solidified darkness instantly appeared around Syrian, firmly binding him in place, like a frozen frame in a camera. Syrian, bound in place by the cursed power, calmly looked at the other party. The next second, the image of Syrian reflected in Mistral's eyes came to life. It smiled and waved at his bound self outside, then snapped its fingers. Snap! Amidst a somewhat illusory sound, an incredibly dazzling white light ignited within Mistral's crimson eyes, temporarily blinding him. Damn it! Mistral's body disintegrated, transforming into a swarm of vampire bats existing between reality and illusion. At the same time, the deep darkness that had solidified Syrian's body vanished. He tilted his head slightly and called out into the air above. Don't just watch. The next second, a dense gray fog churned in his vision, and a tall angel with 12 pairs of silvery wings flew out from the gray fog, landing in front of him, and wrapping him in layers with the wings behind him. In his eyes, a silver-colored ring formed by a long snake biting its own tail appeared and slowly rotated. After a brief interval, Syrian's figure appeared in the eyes of all the vampire bats, and the connection Mistral had just severed was miraculously re-established. At the same time, one after another illusory black flames spontaneously ignited on the bodies of the vampire bats, burning their life and spirituality. A flicker of surprise crossed Syrian's eyes, then an illusory, slowly turning book was reflected within them. I came, I saw, I recorded. As the incantation appeared, he conjured a two-handed greatsword, forged from pure dawn, from the air with both hands. The silver sword of dawn was plunged into the ground before him, and the great sword then disintegrated, transforming into countless fragments of dawn-like light. Dense, countless fragments of light formed a shimmering and violent, sharp hurricane, sweeping towards Kasimi, who had not yet fully recovered in front. At the same time, due to the mystical connection established by the curse, the image of Syrian reflected in the eyes of each vampire bat also performed the same action, summoning countless miniature storms of light from within. Under the cutting of sharp silver light spots and the scorching of black flames, the vampire bats in the air all turned into black smoke and vanished. Then Mistral's body reappeared in the moonlight. He had many shallow marks on his body, as if cut by a sharp blade, and there were also black flames, like shadows, burning in the place of his two eyes. Seeing this, Syrian also stopped maintaining the storm of light, allowing the sharp silver storm to dissipate in the moonlight. Mainly, Kasimi ran too fast. Aside from being grazed by the sharp light fragments at the very beginning when caught off guard, the storm of light he created later couldn't touch the opponent again. As the black flames burning quietly in his eye sockets were swallowed by the moonlight, Mistral, no longer so calm, looked at Syrian again and said coldly, "The warning you wanted has been delivered. Let's end this matter here. I will restrain the sanguine of Backland, and such a thing will not happen again." Syrian looked up at the illusory, full moon, in the sky, then placed his hand on his chest and bowed slightly to the other party. "Of course, I wish you a pleasant evening." As he bowed, the illusory book was once again reflected in his eyes. As he finished his bow, his figure became illusory, stained with a layer of colorful starlight, and he abruptly vanished under the gaze of Mistral and Kasimi. Kasimi let out a sigh of relief, reaching out to touch the spot on his body that had just been touched by the storm of light, grimacing. The Dawn Paladin's dawn restrained the sanguine. The wounds on his body now not only showed no signs of healing but tended to worsen. A flicker of resentment flashed in his eyes, and he turned his head to look at Mistral beside him. "Count Mistral, are we just going to let him leave like this?" Mistral gave him a somewhat displeased glance. "Otherwise, of course, you can also rush up and duel him yourself, to regain your face." Recalling the dark red spear that had easily pierced his head just moments ago, giving him no chance to react, Kasimi subconsciously shrank back. After reacting, he puffed out his chest and said stubbornly, "If he didn't use Beyonder abilities at the demigod sequence, I would definitely not be afraid of him. Or if you provide some help, giving me time to use potions, I could definitely defeat him easily too." Mistral frowned, seeing his reaction, without any sanguine arrogance or confidence. Shaking his head, he made the illusory, full moon, in midair disappear, then looked towards the manor gate. Just now, a demigod of a higher sequence than me was secretly watching over him. I couldn't offer any help, but the full moon state is itself the best buff for the sanguine. He paused, then looked at Kasimi and said, "But even with the full moon's blessing, you didn't even dare to approach him. Also, you should think about how to explain this matter to Lord Nibis." With that said, his figure instantly disintegrated, transforming into a swarm of vampire bats existing between reality and illusion, flying towards the direction outside the manor. Chapter 216. At least, it shouldn't be outdoors. After several consecutive flashes, Syrian stopped at a secluded street corner. His record of flashes was used up. In his vision, the grayish-white mist surged again, and the fool, high above the gray fog, cast his gaze upon him. "There was a very beautiful woman next to you just now." At the same time, a scene appeared in his mind. Clarice, wearing a black court gown with bright dark gray eyes, stood not far from him, quietly gazing at him, from when he was at the Audra family's manor. Syrian nodded with little surprise. He had already suspected something when those vampire bats spontaneously ignited with black flames. After the image in his mind disappeared, he looked around before asking. "She didn't follow?" Klein's voice hesitated for a moment before sounding in his ear. "No, probably, you flashed too fast just now." "What was the oracle mentioned by that sanguine demigod, and why did you suddenly cause trouble at the sanguine's place?" "That's not like your style." "What kind of style am I?" Without waiting for an answer, he continued on his own. "The scribe's acting must take him away from Backland. To prevent similar incidents from affecting my family again, I need to make my stance clear before leaving here. To maintain the relationship between us, the sanguine might even leave 1 or 2 free bodyguards near my home. As for the oracle, it wasn't their ancestors' oracle at all, but they didn't mind using it. After a brief silence, Klein continued to ask, "When do you plan to leave Backland, and where will you digest the potion?" Syrian replied thoughtfully, "Within this week. Before I leave, I must first retrieve everything from the mausoleum Amen left behind. As for where to go, the Blue Sea, my dream. I plan to become a bounty hunter at sea first. I have a premonition that you will soon follow in my footsteps." After a moment of speechlessness, Klein couldn't help but retort, "You just simply know that my Sequence 5 advancement ritual requires finding a mermaid. By the way, speaking of mermaids, do you know where to find them?" Syrian shook his head slightly. "I only know that the Church of the Night and the Secret Order both have their own channels. You can choose to join one of them, or find an ocean songster who sings well, the effect should be similar." Klein, ocean songster. Syrian nodded gently. "This is a Sequence 5 of the Sailor Pathway, but I don't recommend you seek out Mr. Hanged Man, he clearly belongs to the type who can't sing well. Potions can only grant Beyonders knowledge of related abilities, but whether one sings well is a matter of talent." Klein suddenly noticed a graceful figure outlined out of thin air in front of a bay window not far away, and quickly said, "That very beautiful lady has caught up. I wish you a pleasant evening." As he spoke, the gray fog in Syrian's vision quickly receded, and then he saw Clarice walking towards him with a smile. "Long time no see. Did you specifically stay here to wait for me?" Syrian immediately nodded, "Of course." Clarice's smile instantly became radiant. She quickly approached, took his wrist with one hand, placed the other on his lower back, and rested her head on his shoulder, like intimate lovers reunited after a long time. Above the gray fog, Klein silently covered his chest and averted his gaze. "This scene is extremely unfriendly to single people, and it's an even greater blow to me, who has been single both before and after transmigration." After Clarice rested her head on his shoulder, Syrian suddenly realized that she was almost as tall as he was. If she wore high heels, she would be even taller. A beat later, his mind, somewhat dulled by rising desire and surging blood, finally registered, she was male before Sequence 7, so being about the same height as me seems quite normal. At that very instant, the budding, surging stirrings in his heart instantly vanished. Clarice raised her hand and stroked his cheek, then leaned her head close to his ear, her warm breath caressing his earlobe, and his recently vanished stirrings revived. "Heh, you're still so interesting." After a playful remark, she changed the subject, saying intimately, "I tried very hard to help you just now, you know. How do you plan to thank me?" A hint: I prefer young, handsome, energetic, and passionate bodies. As she spoke, one of her hands gently tapped Syrian's lower back repeatedly. That tingling sensation made Syrian's breathing become erratic. Gulping down non-existent saliva, he raised his hand and gently pressed down on Clarice's restless hand, smiling stiffly. I know a very famous Intis restaurant. It's said that the head chef's ancestors were court chefs for Emperor Rosal, and they specialized in the court dishes invented by Emperor Rosal." A hint of disappointment flashed in Clarice's eyes at just the right moment, then she forced a strong smile and nodded. "All right, but if the dishes there don't satisfy me, I can ask for something else to eat." As she spoke, one hand traced a path from Syrian's Adam's apple downwards, past his chest, his abdomen, stopping just before touching a certain indescribable something. A drop of sweat slid down Syrian's temple. After her hand stopped descending, he let out a long sigh of relief in his heart. One shouldn't be too much like Rosal, at least, not outdoors. Above the gray fog, Klein leaned back in the cold, high-backed chair, gazing at the boundless gray mist ahead, repeatedly taking deep breaths. After suppressing the slight stirrings aroused by Clarice, he cast his gaze back again. "I always feel like I've become a pervert peeping at a young couple in love. I shouldn't think that way. I'm just worried about Syrian's safety. After all, that exceptionally beautiful and extraordinarily charming lady is most likely a demoness at the demigod level. I'll observe for a bit longer, at least to confirm if she's simply after Syrian's body, or if she has other motives. If it's the former, he will sit at the same table as Emperor Rosal in the future." Hillsden Borough, Intis Royal High-End Restaurant. In a private room near the Tassoc River, Syrian smiled, his heart bleeding as he looked at the prices on the menu. He regretted his curiosity about this restaurant. After all, this was a place that would make even Dwayne Dantes wince. After consulting Clarice and ordering their dishes, the two chatted like long unseen, yet exceptionally familiar, friends. Above the gray fog, Klein had originally planned to leave, but after seeing the prices on the menu in Syrian's hand, he temporarily decided to watch a bit longer. Although he hadn't experienced it firsthand, by rounding up, he had also been to a high-end restaurant. My main purpose is to enrich my knowledge. If I need to impersonate a noble or a rich person after advancing to faceless, I won't be seen through at a glance because I've never been to a high-end restaurant. However, a beautiful demoness in a high-end restaurant, is this guy really going to become Rosal 2.0? In the high-end restaurant, Syrian, whom Klein considered Rosal 2.0, tasted the exquisite food before him with great curiosity. It was neither Western nor Chinese. It tastes better than I imagined, but it completely lacks the flavor of Chinese cuisine, only somewhat similar in presentation. As his thoughts drifted, Clarice held up a wine glass, swaying it before his eyes. Emperor Rosal said that fine wine and beautiful women go better together. Now, you have both. What are your thoughts on this? Syrian looked at the swaying red wine glass before him, and behind it, that radiant, passionate, tempting yet pure smile, and the slightly rising and falling chest, revealing a large expanse of fair skin. Mom, I can't take it anymore. After shouting in his heart, Syrian reached out and snatched the wine glass from her hand, downing its contents in one go. I think you are the most beautiful and charming lady I have ever seen. And then, as she spoke, Clarice poured another glass of wine and handed it to him. Syrian took the wine glass and mumbled, and then, of course, I want to take you home. Clarice's smile deepened instantly. Before Syrian could react, she had already sat beside him, half her body draped in his arms. The scent of perfume mixed with alcohol filled Syrian's nostrils, causing his thoughts to become sluggish. Clarice chuckled, reaching out to embrace his neck, and said intimately, "Then take me home now." Chapter 217, Emperor Rosal, you are right. Hiss, ah. Syrian rubbed his head and propped himself up from the bed. The soreness in his body and the intermittent images flashing in his mind gradually made him realize. I think I had a hangover last night. As he pondered, a slender, fair hand wrapped around his waist, pulling him back into the covers. Then, a warm, soft, and elastic body entwined him. Syrian suddenly stiffened, and a series of images flashed through his mind. There were images of him embracing Clarice and returning home, of the two of them falling onto the bed together, their clothes gradually disappearing. He could even clearly recall the slight tremor when his hand caressed her body, the warmth of his fingertips, and the delicate sensation. The words he was about to utter were blocked by another mouth, and then his body, more honest than his mind, embraced the other person, kissing passionately. The sunlight from outside the window streamed into the room, falling on Syrian's face, dispelling the last vestiges of his sleepiness. Clarice, with her long, dark, lustrous hair casually draped over her shoulders, leaned against the window, enjoying Backland's rare sunny day. Noticing Syrian's gaze, she turned her head and chuckled softly. Little one, you performed well last night. You're much braver than the last time we met. Young and passionate love should be bold and unrestrained. Do whatever you want. Do whatever you want, a verb in your vocabulary? He muttered inwardly, then asked curiously. Aren't you worried about being discovered by that mystical item of the steam church now? Clarice gave a carefree smile. The primordial one gives me shelter. As long as I don't do anything too attention-grabbing, neither the steam church nor the churches of the Evernight and Storms will discover me. She paused, then asked casually. Have you found a white statue in any of the nearby mirror worlds? A statue? Syrian pondered for a moment, then shook his head. No, although things from reality occasionally appear in the nearby mirror worlds, I've never seen an item as large as a statue. Clarice shook her head slightly. That statue isn't big, only palm-sized, entirely like white jade, and shaped like a very beautiful nude woman. If you see it, remember to stay far away and tell me immediately. Okay. Syrian nodded seriously. Clarice didn't dwell on the topic. She walked with light steps to Syrian, placing a crystal-clear, ice-like rectangular amulet on his bare chest. This is the amulet of ice. It needs to be used in conjunction with the mirror world. You can use it to send me messages or to travel through the mirror world. The former cannot exceed the coverage of a large city. Although the latter isn't very useful for you, it carries my aura and can help you avoid most dangers in the mirror world. It can only be used once, so if you miss me, it's better to come and find me in person. As she spoke, her hand traced down Syrian's chest, slipping under the covers. Syrian's body stiffened slightly, a mix of embarrassment and enjoyment. Just as he felt his desires being reignited, Clarice suddenly withdrew her hand. What a pity, I still have to go find a stubborn old man today to continue the unfinished handover from last time, so I can't continue to enjoy Backland's sunshine with you. With that, she reluctantly walked towards the full-length mirror in the corner, her figure quietly merging into it. After watching Clarice leave, Syrian pulled the quilt over his head. Damn it. I'm following in Emperor Rosal's footsteps. But, it felt so good, I think I'm getting addicted. No, she's a demoness. She used to be a man just like me. But she is already a Sequence 3 demoness, she has already reconciled with her reflection in the mirror, and there are no longer any male characteristics within her. But what if she chose to enslave and charm her reflection in the mirror back then? Thoughts flashed through Syrian's mind, two small figures, one black and one white, fought, pulling each other's wings, rolling into a ball in his mind, turning his thoughts into a tangled mess. 10 minutes later, a thick gray mist suddenly emerged in his vision. Then Klein's voice echoed in his ear, this time shouldn't disturb you, right? Syrian replied with a stiff face, no. Klein. That's good. The mystical item from Mr. Hanged Man, and the spiritual world anecdotes, paid by Miss Magician, as well as the 2 Beander characteristics purchased from me, when do you plan to pick them up? Also, can those 2 Beander characteristics really not be increased in price? £1,600 isn't even enough for you to have a few more dinners like last night. Syrian. At noon, by the way, no regrets on the offer. If you had drunk the assassin potion back then, let alone £1,600, I would still hesitate even at £16,000. Thanks, but no thanks, I refuse the assassin potion. Muttering to himself, Klein suddenly recalled a page from Rosal's diary he had read before and quipped. It seems you've already experienced the joy of Emperor Rosal. How does the taste of a demoness feel? Syrian looked up at the figure high above the gray fog and sighed. Before I understood, I thought Emperor Rosal's happiness was hollow, but after understanding, I realized I was superficial. Emperor Rosal was truly very happy indeed. Klein's mouth twitched slightly above the gray fog. He realized he had overestimated the other party's sense of shame. Leaving behind a remark of, "You've fallen," he directly left above the gray fog. Syrian lay in bed until noon before rubbing his still sore lower back and getting up. After taking a shower and changing clothes, Syrian looked at his refreshed reflection in the mirror and rubbed his cheeks. Emperor Rosal, I found you were right. Also, the apprentice pathway's physical enhancement is a bit too weak. The last time my physical fitness improved was when I was a trickmaster. I almost ended up being the one who had to lean on walls to walk. Returning to the bedroom, he found the screaming scroll, which was pressed under a pile of discarded clothes on the floor. The twisted figure in the scroll had its back to him, huddled in a ball, seemingly deep in self-isolation. After gazing for half a second, Syrian reached out and patted the scroll twice. The twisted figure, which had been huddled with its back to him, finally emerged from its self-isolation, returning to normal on the scroll, though its twisted face looked utterly gloomy. Ah, great master, I think I'm sick. Achoo. As it spoke, the twisted figure in the scroll started to sneeze. Syrian frowned. This fellow was not only a creature in a painting but also a mystical item. Even if it got sick, it should be a disease unique to creatures in paintings. Soon, a figure came to mind, Clarice, the demoness of undying. He paused, then asked in a deep voice. Before you got sick, what did you want to do? The twisted figure in the painting held its head, pondering for a long while before saying. Great master, I wanted to remind you to be careful of that woman's charm. But after getting sick, my head felt muddled, and I forgot about it. I'm sorry, master, I failed in my duty. Charm, Syrian frowned, then comforted it. It's all right. She had no ill intentions, otherwise, I would have noticed the problem without your reminder. She just simply coveted my body, and perhaps also wanted to use me to digest some undying potion. Casually hanging the scroll on the wall and tidying up the room, he didn't rush to find materials to set up the ritual for a boon. Instead, he directly recited the honorific name of the fool. The fool who does not belong to this era, the mysterious ruler above the gray fog, the king of yellow and black who controls good luck. Soon, a thick gray mist permeated his vision, and the fool, Klein, seated above the gray fog, lowered his gaze, his voice echoing leisurely in Syrian's ear. What is it again? Syrian raised his head slightly and said calmly. Pull me above the gray fog for a moment to purify my spiritual body. It might be a bit slow if I do it myself. Klein. After a moment of silence, he still pulled Syrian above the gray fog. The moment he appeared in his designated seat, Syrian suddenly felt a sense of ease, as if he had laid down a heavy burden he had been carrying. He closed his eyes, quickly examining his own state through meditation. After confirming there were no issues, he opened his eyes and recalled Clarissa's figure in his mind. It was distinctly different from before, although he was still amazed by her beauty. That familiar, intimate, and infatuated feeling was gone. Chapter 218 Emperor Rosal once said. Klein also observed Syrian with his spirit vision until Syrian calmly opened his eyes, then asked. What happened? Syrian shook his head. I was unknowingly charmed yesterday. Fortunately, the other party only coveted my young and handsome body, and had no other dangerous intentions. 4. Klein raised his hand and touched his chest. This was a very serious topic, but he felt hurt. After a moment of silence, he said, when I observed above the gray fog yesterday, there were no traces of charm on you, at least not an active charm. Also, you truly seemed to be enjoying yourself this morning. Syrian paused, then slightly raised his chin and said, Emperor Rosal once said, if you can't resist, then enjoy it. Klein. The great emperor also has a successor. He paused, then asked curiously, you don't seem to care about being charmed. Syrian nodded calmly. Mainly because the other party had no ill intentions, otherwise, my spiritual intuition would have warned me immediately. Moreover, after the charmed state disappeared, I didn't develop any ill will or sensory preferences towards her. 66. After observing Syrian with spirit vision for a while longer, he finally complained. If I couldn't clearly see your current state, I'd suspect the charm on you hadn't been completely cleansed. He paused and added, that's enough, I don't want to hear any more Rosal-style pronouncements. Remember to perform the ritual of supplication and bestowal to take down all the things piled up here. With that, he waved his hand, and a crimson light ascended, carrying Syrian's figure away from the palace above the gray fog. He then waited quietly above the gray fog for 2 minutes. The crimson star representing Syrian suddenly expanded, and then a familiar prayer sounded in his ears. The fool who does not belong to this era. ... I implore you to open the door of the kingdom, I implore you to bestow your grace. Klein immediately spread his spirituality to respond. The surrounding gray mist surged, gathering from the back of the great hall and quickly solidifying into the shape of a dark green, massive door. West District, Green Cemetery. At Owen and Verdu's request, Lawrence brought them to pay respects to the Abraham family members buried here. In front of the tombstone, after placing the brought flowers, Lawrence stepped back and sighed. His name was Labaro, my younger brother by the same mother. He chose to settle in Backland after that rebellion. Initially, we had regular correspondence, but in recent years, I stopped receiving letters from him. All the letters I sent also vanished without a trace, with no reply. I was somewhat worried they might have encountered difficulties, so I rushed here from Intersea County to find him. But then I learned that he and his wife had already passed away. Labaro was several years younger than me. Owen listened in silence, then looked helplessly at Verdu beside him, not knowing how to even begin to offer comfort. Only after truly coming into contact with the Abraham family and learning about their situation from Verdu and Lawrence did he finally understand what a heavy burden the family's responsibility was, and why his father had chosen to evade it back then. Verdu stepped forward 2 paces, raised his hand, and patted Lawrence's shoulder. For Labaro, death may not be a bad thing. At least he has completely broken free from the bloodline curse and no longer has to live a life of constant apprehension. Leave the sadness here, we still need to move forward. Perhaps we have found the opportunity to completely resolve the problems brought by the bloodline curse. Lawrence nodded silently, then looked towards the depths of the cemetery and said, "You all wait for me here. I'm going to see Mrs. Anneliese, her grave is not far from here." Owen wanted to suggest going together, but he was stopped by Verdu's gaze. He waited until Lawrence's back disappeared from view before he couldn't help but ask, "Why aren't we going to see?" Verdu pointed to the tombstone in front of them and said in a deep voice, "He needs to be alone for a while. Lawrence probably hasn't told you that, besides the brother who completely abandoned the Abraham family's responsibilities and glory and never contacted him again, he has no other relatives. He only came to Backland so many years after losing contact with Labaro, perhaps fearing that Labaro might also choose to abandon the Abraham family's responsibilities. Only when he felt his life drawing to a close did he bravely come to find Labaro, only to find an old tomb." Owen felt a sting in his eyes, so he lowered his head. On the other side of the cemetery, when Lawrence arrived at Mrs. Anneliese's tombstone, there was another person paying respects. It was a lady, dressed in an elegant black gown, wearing a soft black hat with a fine mesh veil draped down. From where he stood, he couldn't clearly see her face, but his astrologer's spiritual intuition made him feel a sense of familiarity. This should be someone he had met before. After a brief thought, he remembered the kind lady he had met when he was looking for Labaro and his wife earlier. Perhaps Mrs. Anneliese eventually gave her that Beander characteristic of an apprentice. As thoughts flickered, he saw the lady who was paying respects to Mrs. Anneliese stand up straight, her eyes closed, as if reminiscing. A moment later, he finally couldn't help but speak. "You truly are a kind and good person." Furs, who was immersed in her memories, turned back in surprise, only to find Mr. Lawrence from the Abraham family had appeared here at some point, also holding a bouquet of elegant flowers. It seems it's just a coincidence. He shouldn't have discovered that Mrs. Anneliese gave me that Beander characteristic of an apprentice. But isn't the frequency of these coincidences too high? As her thoughts churned, she moved aside, clearing the space in front of the tombstone, and sincerely said, "No, this has nothing to do with kindness or goodwill. It's just that Mrs. Anneliese once brought me, who had lost my mother, an unforgettable period of warmth." "That shows you value friendship," Lawrence said, placing the flowers in his hand in front of the tombstone. He then stepped back 2 paces, his azure eyes looking at Furs with gentle calm. Furs felt somewhat uncomfortable under his gaze. Just as she was about to make an excuse to leave, she heard words from Lawrence that left her a little flustered. "Let's find a quiet place to talk. Mrs. Anneliese must have given you that item at the end of her life. That item that can turn an ordinary person into a Beander." Furs's pupils contracted slightly. Before she could think of words to gloss over it, she heard Lawrence say to himself, "Don't worry, I'm not here to reclaim it. Although I don't know you well enough yet, I trust and respect Mrs. Anneliese's judgment. I just want to understand a bit, and also teach you some common knowledge of the mystical world. Mrs. Anneliese probably didn't have the chance to teach you this knowledge back then, so I'll make up for it. Without common knowledge, the mystical world is quite dangerous for newcomers, especially since the apprentice stage lacks the necessary abilities to deal with danger." Furs hesitated for a moment, then finally nodded. "All right. Mr. Lawrence shouldn't be a bad person, and he's not trying to reclaim the apprentice Beander characteristic from me. However, I still need to find an opportunity to discreetly pray to Mr. Fool." After taking down all the items temporarily stored with Klein above the gray fog through the ritual of sacrifice and bestowal, Syrian then used the remaining materials to set up a new ritual. The distorted figure in the painting hanging on the wall swayed its head back and forth with his movements. After he completed the ritual arrangement on the floor, it finally couldn't help but ask curiously, "Great Master, what ritual are you setting up?" Syrian replied without looking up, "A ritual to recruit a messenger for myself." The distorted figure's tone suddenly rose. "A messenger? Oh, my great master, what do you think of me? As long as you bestow upon me a little more insignificant power, I can break free from the confines of the painting, wander freely in the spirit world, and even infiltrate all painting worlds. I can be said to be the most suitable messenger for you." Syrian looked at the figure in the painting, who was almost twisting himself into a flower, and silently sighed. I can't bestow anything, and you're ugly, no thank you. He muttered to himself, then stepped back 2 paces, while raising his hand and snapping his fingers. Whoosh! The 3 candles placed in the center of the ritual were instantly lit, their crimson flames flickering continuously. Spirits wandering in the upper realm, friendly creatures that can be commanded, unique existences willing to become my messengers. Chapter 219, Summoning a Messenger. A cold wind suddenly swept through the room, carrying a trembling, weeping sound. The flickering yellow candlelight was tinged with a ghostly blue hue. Then, the flame of the 3rd candle suddenly expanded, and rings of light rapidly spread out, gradually forming an illusory door beyond normal comprehension. Sirian looked curiously behind the door. His powerful spiritual intuition and his true vision, which could perceive dimensions to some extent, allowed him to see some scenes behind the door. There were strange shadows covering everything from above. There was also a group of unique spiritual world creatures, thin as paper and colorful, and there were transparent tentacles, only outlines remaining. Then, they all stopped when they approached the summoning door formed by the ritual's power, lingering nearby, seemingly unable to find the door to respond to the summons. Spiritual world creatures, astral world creatures, and even strange species from other dimensions, you're really popular. Sirian nodded in distress. It's true that I'm popular, but now they all seem to be lost. Don't people queue up when applying for a job? Maybe they're just queuing. Maybe. Sirian nodded uncertainly. He then frowned and looked around the empty room, feeling as if he had forgotten something, but couldn't recall it at the moment. Never mind, if he couldn't remember, it probably wasn't important. He should focus on the messenger issue first. What do you plan to recruit a messenger for? Sirian replied. To send letters, of course. Well, if they're strong enough, they can also help in a fight. What are your requirements for a messenger, then? Sirian pondered for a moment before replying. They must be able to communicate normally, be a friendly existence, be fast enough, and it's even better if they have decent strength. Also, they should preferably be handsome. All of these, I can do. Sirian's calm eyes gradually widened. It was as if an illusory string had snapped in his mind, and memories flashed back. He finally realized, belatedly, the inconsistency. In the room where the ritual was set up, besides himself, there was only a talking painting. There was no 3rd person present at all. At least not before he completed the ritual to summon a messenger. After silently replacing himself with a self-portrait he carried, he then carefully looked around, searching for the extra person in the room. Soon, he found the extra person in front of the wall where the screaming painting was hung. It was an old man, entirely gray and white except for his pale golden eyes. His robe had a stone-like texture, as if carved from marble, and his long, lustreless hair and beard almost touched the floor. His face was gaunt, and his body was so thin that only skin and bones remained. His entire being exuded an aura of decay, as if he would weather away into the air and disappear at any moment. As if sensing Sirian's gaze, he turned his head and smiled, nodding towards Sirian's direction. Well, have you decided whether you want me to be your messenger? Sirian asked hesitantly. Are you really here to be a messenger? The gaunt old man in front of him smiled and nodded. Of course, why else would I respond to your ritual? Sirian nodded, conflicted. This old man was a bit eerie. He was at least at the saint level of the spectator pathway, but this pathway wasn't good at speed. Moreover, with the overwhelming sense of decay emanating from him, Sirian doubted whether, if he let the old man deliver a letter for him, he and the letter would collapse in front of the recipient, turning the delivery into a scam. After a pause, he asked, Then, are you fast enough? No sooner had he spoken than the gaunt old man in front of him vanished like an afterimage, and at the same time, a thin, gray-white hand rested on his shoulder. His spiritual intuition gave no warning, no hint at all, as if it hadn't noticed that there was someone behind him. At least on the level of a dream weaver, Sirian lowered his eyes, then turned around to see the gaunt old man standing behind him with a smile. Although not comparable to those travelers, I think my speed isn't too bad. After all, Sirian asked curiously, after all what? The old man shook his head slightly, not answering the question. Seeing this, Sirian didn't press further and changed the subject. You shouldn't be short of the little bit of spirituality paid for sending letters, right? The gaunt old man nodded slightly. Indeed, I don't need spirituality. Syrian pressed. Then what do you need, or what do you want to gain? The old man didn't answer directly, but walked to the side and took down the screaming painting hanging on the wall. As for the distorted figure in the painting, it had been quietly huddled in a corner of the painting ever since Syrian noticed it. The old man looked at the huddled figure in the painting and nodded with satisfaction. I want the pollution on it, or rather, the boon. Of course, simply sending letters in exchange for a boon isn't enough, so you can also hire me to help you fight when needed. A peculiar glint flashed in Syrian's eyes, but he quickly reined it in, calmly observing the other party. He was now certain that this old man was definitely not a demigod, but an angel, and an angel of the spectator pathway. But, even if he was an angel, why would he seek out pollution for no reason? Had he lived too long and wanted to find some excitement in his boring life? As the thought flashed through his mind, the gaunt old man in front of him replied. I have indeed lived for a very long time, but a long life has not made me feel bored or want to end my life. On the contrary, I want to continue living, to continue extending my life. After a moment of thought, Syrian nodded and replied. If that's your only request, then yes. The old man smiled and nodded. Then let's sign the contract. Oh, and please don't tell Adam about my existence, or any related entities. He paused, then added, he isn't paying attention here now, and you won't need to worry in the future. I have a way to avoid his gaze. All right. Syrian nodded, then his action of drafting the contract suddenly paused. If not Adam, who should he have as a witness for the contract? If you are willing to trust me, I can resolve the issue of the witness. Upon hearing this, Syrian directly handed over the half-written parchment in his hand to the other party. After the old man took it, a clear golden radiance emanated from his pale golden eyes. The golden light became purer and purer, eventually evolving into a seal-like projection. On the parchment where the contract was drafted, golden light intertwined like threads, outlining a seal magnified several times, then fixing it as an imprint. It's done. The old man handed the completed contract back. Syrian frowned as he took it, his gaze carefully scrutinizing the entirely gray and white old man. He didn't know if it was his imagination, but he felt that the gaunt old man in front of him looked a little older than before. But those pale golden eyes appeared exceptionally bright. He could even see his own reflection in them. Moreover, notarization is an ability belonging to the sun pathway. If he hadn't switched pathways before, then was he polluted by the chaos sea? Combining this with the other party's desire not to be discovered by Adam, Syrian guessed that the old man was most likely in the second situation. So, is he trying to use my pollution to counteract the chaos sea pollution on him? Isn't he overestimating me too much? There's also another question. How did he discover my peculiarity? As his thoughts drifted, he saw the gaunt old man in front of him smile gently, a flicker of light passing through his bright, pale golden eyes. After a moment of trance, he felt as if he had entered a third-person perspective, observing a segment of his memory in a peculiar way. It was an island standing on a deep, dark sea, with waves churning around it, like the prelude to a storm. A few breaths later, an invisible force calmed everything, and all the winds and waves subsided. Under the spiritual sky that enveloped everything, a gray-white, circling, flying, lizard-faced giant dragon with a distinct aged appearance flew over the island. Leaving a gentle, aged voice echoing. No need to search. I was merely a passerby who happened to pass through your mind world, saw a small tide, and smoothed it out casually. Coming back to his senses, Syrian looked at the gaunt old man in front of him with a peculiar expression. Clearly, the other party was the passerby who had passed through his mind world and brought him comfort back then. So it was you back then. Did you know about my peculiarity even then? Chapter 220, Unexpected Prayer, an extra chapter for yesterday's 1000 monthly votes. The withered old man in front of him shook his head slightly, his voice ancient and hoarse. No, I just happened to pass through that mental world and only paid more attention after I found out you had come into contact with Adam. As for discovering your uniqueness, that came later. He paused, then pointed at the parchment contract in Syrian's hand and said. Sign the contract first. I feel very insecure staying by your side for too long. Adam could cast his gaze at any moment, and I don't want to face him directly, or rather, no ancient dragon wants to face him directly. All right. Serene nodded, then wrote a pseudonym on the yellowish-brown parchment. Randolph Carter. The contract recognizes a unique spiritual aura. As for the name, it's just a code, anything can be written. During the scribe and traveler sequences, he was destined to travel the world to digest the potion. When out and about, it was safer to have an extra identity. At least in the future, if Randolph Carter was wanted by a true God Church or an evil God Church, he could safely return to being Serene Gray. After he signed his name, the withered old man also wrote his name on the parchment. Serene curiously glanced at it. This ancient dragon, who had lived for an unknown amount of time, was named Edfarna. As both of them left their names on the parchment, golden illusory flames instantly ignited on the yellowish-brown parchment. Then, two brilliant golden orbs of light, like miniature suns, separated and entered Serene and Edfarna's bodies respectively. Serene closed his eyes. He could clearly feel a heavy, lock-like illusory presence added to his spirit. I think you need an item that can reduce your sense of presence, otherwise, accidentally encountering a mystery prior could easily cause problems later. Although this should be a problem for the mystery prior to worry about, too many similar incidents will always bring some unnecessary surprises. Serene nodded. This was indeed a problem that needed attention. So far, he had only encountered two mystery priors. One was Bernadette, who could freely use the eye of mystery prying and had long become a clairvoyant, and the other had become his fanatical believer. If he encountered other mystery priors in the future, it would be fine if they all became fanatical believers like House. But if they directly lost control or died suddenly, he would probably become the Moses Ascetic Order's #1 public enemy. It might even affect the Steam Church's attitude towards him, as they also cultivated many mystery priors. He paused, then looked at Edfarna and seriously asked, "Do you have any good suggestions?" He believed that since this ancient dragon pointed out the problem, he should have a way to help him solve it. Edfarna chuckled and shook his head. "Actually, you don't need to ask me for help. You can do it yourself." He paused, then pointed to the painting hanging on the wall as a hint, "Your paintings. Since you can make paintings have various mystical item effects, you should also be able to draw a layer of disguise on yourself, right? With your uniqueness, low and mid-sequence beyonders will find it difficult to see through your disguise. And at high sequences, mystery priors can already freely control the ability of the eye of mystery prying and have learned to curb their curiosity." Serene's eyes lit up. As a man who didn't usually wear makeup, he had never thought about the problem in that direction before. But on second thought, this suggestion was highly feasible. Seeing him lost in thought, Edfarna took 2 steps back and calmly said, "Well then, I wish you a pleasant life and journey ahead." Before he finished speaking, his figure had become transparent, then disappeared from Serene's sight. As Edfarna's figure disappeared, Serene was surprised to find that the illusory door connecting to the spirit world, created by the messenger summoning ritual, had not yet vanished. He didn't come through the ritual response at all. He glanced at the strange spirit world, astral world, and interdimensional creatures still lingering behind the door, unable to find the ritual response channel but unwilling to leave. Serene wondered if ending the ritual like this would leave him with a bad reputation among these strange creatures. "Forget it, let my reputation be harmed. Goodly is also an angel-level messenger. And not in a severely crippled state like Klein's messenger lady, although the pollutants from the Chaos Sea are even more outrageous." After muttering a few words, he directly ended the messenger summoning ritual. As for the creatures still lingering in the spirit world, wanting to respond to the ritual but unable to find the channel, they could only blame themselves for not passing the screening. As he cleaned up the ritual remnants in the room, the distorted figure in the painting on the wall asked, "Master, are you not planning to summon a messenger anymore?" Serene looked him up and down, and after confirming that he had no impression of everything that had just happened, he calmly replied, "No need. He's really careful, but why didn't it affect my memory? Does he think Adam wouldn't directly read my memory like that?" As his thoughts drifted, layers of illusory prayers suddenly echoed in his ears. After putting down the materials in his hand, he pulled over a chair and sat down, then closed his eyes to meditate, allowing his spirit to ascend to a dimension overlooking all things. His gaze followed the connection established by the prayer, and then he saw an unexpected figure, the unlucky thief who had accepted Kasimi Adra's commission at a Beander gathering earlier. He was somewhat surprised that the other party would actively recite his honorific name. Normally, Beanders who encountered such things should wish to forget all memories of that time. He hesitated whether to respond to the other party. After all, he had made him recite his honorific name purely for panic and secrecy. While he hesitated, the person praying to him began to pray on his own, just like praying to a deity in a true God's church, without any sense of incongruity. This guy's acceptance of evil gods almost made me wonder if I had polluted him at some point. After silently complaining, he patiently listened to the other party's prayer. Exalted existence above dimensions, I have encountered unprecedented difficulties. Because I left some traces when stealing things before, I am now wanted by the Lord of Storm's church. Not only the Punisher of the Storm Church, but also the bounty hunters active in Backland, and their informants, are all searching for me. Having lost that invisibility cloak, and with the damage to my spirit body not yet healed, I am powerless to escape Backland. But if I stay here, I will eventually be found, either killed directly or locked in the church's underground. Exalted existence above dimensions, please save me. I don't want to be imprisoned in the St. Wind Cathedral's underground. I don't want to become a church experiment. I don't want to die in agony from torture. After praying to that unknown evil god, Luciano propped himself up by the edge of the table and stood up from his chair. He had no other choice. Without a mystical item, severely wounded, and wanted by the authorities, the bounty hunters active in the city's shadows also targeted him. He even suspected that the Sanguine who had given him the damned mission earlier would also retaliate against him. Damn it, why am I so unlucky? I can't stay in this place anymore. It's all that guy's fault, if it weren't for what? Serene appeared silently behind him and asked curiously. The man, with his back to him, stiffened, then suddenly turned around, a black iron dagger flying from his cuff, heading straight for Serene's face. Clap. Serene raised his hand and snapped his fingers. The dagger, heading for his face, was twisted by an invisible hand and embedded in the window frame behind him. After clearly seeing Serene's appearance, Luciano was stunned, his body instinctively wanting to retreat, but he directly bumped into the edge of the table. How are you here? I haven't revealed any information about you to anyone. Except that I left some letters in my former safe house. If I met with misfortune, the things there would be exposed within a month. Seeing the guilt in the other party's eyes, Serene chuckled and retorted. What do you think? Thump, thump. Footsteps outside the door interrupted Luciano's words, which he was about to speak. Serene looked back at the window, and his left hand in his pocket gently rubbed the glass crystal ball a few times. Immediately, a brilliant starlight flashed in his dark eyes, and several figures, flashing past in the vicinity, appeared in his mind one after another. Punisher of the Storm Church, and 2 bounty hunters hidden nearby. What did you steal from those old storm pigeons? This lineup to deal with a Sequence 9 assassin like you seems a bit too wasteful. Luciano pursed his lips, then gritted his teeth and said, I am willing to offer my most devout faith and soul to that exalted existence above dimensions, please save me. This was the only way out he could think of at the moment. As far as he knew, some cultists' internal structures were actually more harmonious than those of the true God churches. As long as he sincerely joined them, this powerful cultist Beander might not mind saving him. Chapter 221, Are you short on money? Remember what you said. Syrian nodded gravely. Now was a time when he was short on people, so he didn't mind giving this fellow a hand. After a pause, he reached out his hand, and a shimmering, illusory crystal ball materialized out of thin air. The illusory crystal ball floated in midair, rotating a few times, neither fast nor slow, then shattered with a pop, transforming into countless tiny, brilliant starlight, merging into the surrounding void. After completing the anti-divination and anti-tracking interference, Syrian placed a hand on Luciano's shoulder, intending to take him away directly. Bang! The room door was suddenly kicked open violently from the outside, and a slightly damp breeze rushed into the room. 2 Punisher in long trench coats surged into the room with the flowing air. One held a loaded firearm, its muzzle aimed at Syrian, while the other held a white rapier that looked like it was made from fish bones. A faint blue luminescence emanated from the rapier's blade, constantly vibrating the surrounding air, emitting a low frequency, sharp sound that interfered with spirits and caused disorientation. The Punisher holding the fish bone rapier held the blade horizontally across his chest, making the echoing sound in the air even sharper, and at the same time, he sternly said, "Do you surrender directly, or resist a bit before surrendering?" Bang, bang, bang. As he spoke, his companion next to him had already fired his gun. Orange-yellow bullets cut through the air, one after another, landing on Syrian and Luciano. The warning from his spiritual intuition allowed Syrian to anticipate everything before the other party fired. He forcefully pushed away the hand on Luciano's shoulder. The next second, several bullets landed where he had just been, and on Syrian himself. The Syrian pierced by the bullets quickly thinned and became brittle, finally transforming into a crudely cut, pale yellow paper figure that spontaneously combusted in midair. The crimson flames on the spontaneously combusting paper figure suddenly expanded, as if something was about to emerge from within. Hum. Bang. Bang. The two Punisher reacted quickly. A low wind pressure and bullets wrapped in silver-white lightning simultaneously pressed down on the flames on the paper figure. They were both experienced Punisher and knew that some Beyonders could leap out of flames or manipulate flames to launch attacks. But to their surprise, the expanding flames on the paper figure were easily extinguished. The next second, an unfurled painting, composed of twisted figures and a twisted cosmos, appeared before their eyes. The moment they saw the twisted figures in the painting, a chilling wind struck them from behind, making the hairs on their bodies stand on end and plunging them into an indescribable panic. At the same time, a shrill shriek echoed in their minds. As if directly facing the shriek of a revenant, the two Punisher froze stiffly, and crimson liquid flowed from their eyes, nostrils, and ears. Syrian had no intention of pressing his advantage, otherwise, he would truly offend the Storm Church to death from top to bottom. At least, he couldn't do such a thing under the identity of Syrian. As his thoughts drifted, he waved his hand, and the painting suspended in midair automatically floated back into his hand. Then he took 2 steps closer to Luciano, placed one hand on the other's shoulder, and the other hand on the bay window glass in front of him. A ghostly blue light rippled out in layers under his hand like water, quickly coalescing into an illusory door like a water curtain. Recovering from the silent shriek created by the screaming painting, the two Punisher just happened to see Syrian dragging Luciano into the mirror world. The Punisher holding the gun, ignoring the dizziness in his head, immediately pulled the trigger. Bang! Crash! A bullet shot out, but it only shattered the glass on the bay window. After a moment of silence, the Punisher with the fish bone rapier shook his head and sighed. Tell the people outside that they don't need to stake out anymore. The ability to help others travel through the mirror world is said to be an ability only possessed by high-sequence demonesses. After a pause, he suddenly asked, "Do you remember what that person looked like just now?" His companion beside him was about to nod but suddenly choked. I can't seem to remember. He seemed to always have a mask on his face, and yet he didn't. In the washroom, the originally clear mirror suddenly became deep, as if countless intertwined, dark, illusory, and unreal paths were hidden within. Then Syrian's figure appeared in the mirror, easily passing through the mirror as if traversing an invisible water curtain. As for Luciano, he had already handed him over to Lawrence, keeping him as an assistant for odd jobs. After all, he was an old man whose life was nearing its end. Although his condition had recently improved, he still needed to be prevented from relapsing due to excessive work pressure. After all, he wasn't some landlord who ruthlessly exploited his subordinates. After a moment of drifting thoughts, he turned around and, looking in the mirror, wiped off the grease paint on his face that was similar to his skin tone. Following Edfarna's hint, he used grease paint to draw a disguise on his face that looked similar to his original appearance but was subtly different in detail. This had an effect similar to the psychological suggestion of a spectator. For people who knew him and had a relatively deep impression of him, it had almost no effect. But for those who were unfamiliar with him and didn't understand him, it would produce a magical effect, making them unconsciously forget Syrian's appearance and temporarily forget to probe his thoughts and ideas when interacting with him. Just like the two Punisher just now, if they had observed carefully at the time, they would have discovered Syrian's spiritual power, which he hadn't deliberately concealed. It was already at sequence 6 level, and they wouldn't have acted rashly. Being able to create such a disguise was also thanks to the knowledge of the mind domain he had learned from Adam, as well as some mysticism knowledge he had gained after seeing Edfarna's dragon form earlier. He strongly suspected that the latter had deliberately shown him this information, otherwise, it would be too much of a coincidence. Although, from the experiment just now, the effect of this disguise is indeed good. It just consumes too many materials, and there's also the problem of duration. South of the bridge, Harvest Church. Klein, having resolved his dead issues, came here to find Emmeline White according to Syrian's previous hint, intending to purchase the pituitary gland of a mutated thousand-faced hunter, needed for the faceless potion, through the sanguine channels. As soon as he entered the church, he saw the giant-like Father Yutravsky and the vampire Emmeline, dressed in a brown priest's robe, diligently wiping a candlestick, as expected of the Earth Mother Church, which excels at converting vampires. How long had it been? The once rebellious vampire Emmeline had transformed into the image of a devout follower of the Earth Mother. He had originally wanted to praise the professionalism of the Orthodox churches in missionary work, but then he suddenly thought that if one looked at this matter from the vampire's perspective, this conversion to good would become a horror story. What a chaotic and crazy world. In some respects, the orthodox gods and evil gods of this world were no different. One was just more aggressive and violent, while the other was more gentle and understood sustainable development. Fortunately, the goddess's church has always been very gentle in this regard. Or maybe it's because I haven't encountered a true missionary. Realizing that he was in the Earth Mother's church, he quickly reined in these thoughts that could be condemned as blasphemy and refocused his attention on Emmeline. Before being converted by Father Yutravsky, Emmeline, though a bit arrogant and equally disdainful of everyone, could still barely be considered a law-abiding sanguine. No wonder he acted so hateful towards Syrian back then. Anyone would explode in that situation. The smile on Klein's lips suddenly froze. He was somewhat worried that Emmeline might take his anger out on him because of Syrian, refusing to provide him with sanguine channels or opportunities to purchase Beander materials. After a moment of drifting thoughts, he suddenly saw Emmeline put down the rag in his hand and walk towards him. You're not a follower of the Mother, so why are you suddenly here? Are you looking for Father Yutravsky, or are you here to ask for my help? You're not that familiar with the Father, so you're here for me. After 2 seconds of silence, Klein lowered his voice slightly and retorted. Are you short on money? Emmeline froze for a moment, then slightly raised his chin, scoffing. Do not insult a noble sanguine with money. Klein twitched the corner of his mouth expressionlessly, thinking of the information Syrian had specifically told him earlier. He even felt an impulse to egg on this young sanguine in front of him to his death. After a pause, he said to Emmeline, who was trying to look down on him with his chin. To my knowledge, those exquisitely crafted dolls you collect aren't cheap. In fact, they can be considered expensive. Emmeline, #degree. You, what are you talking about? What dolls? Klein used his clown ability to suppress the uncontrollable upward curve of his lips, then casually said. I recently met a master from Trier who specializes in custom-made dolls. Emmeline, impossible, how come I don't know? Chapter 222, The Unceasing Compass. Impossible, why wouldn't I know? Emmeline, who had recovered, coughed twice and said nonchalantly. Which hotel does this master live in? I have a friend who wants to visit him. Oh, by the way, you're helping this master find target clients, and my friend would be a good candidate. Hey, the classic, I have a friend. Klein scoffed internally, but on his face, he maintained a polite smile. I also have a friend, he's about to advance and needs to collect corresponding Beander materials. I wonder if you can help. Emmeline tilted his chin up, saying with a hint of pride. Are you doubting the ability of a noble sanguine? We sanguine aren't as fragmented as you humans, fond of infighting. Even if I don't have what your friend needs, I can still contact the big figures in Backland. But, why should I help you? Seeing the conversation developing in the direction he hoped, Klein asked with a calm smile. Do you have money to custom make dolls for yourself? Do you have money to buy exquisite clothes for your dolls? Do you have money to add beautiful decorations and exclusive small rooms for them? The expression on Emmeline's face froze. He didn't even know what the detective meant by, exclusive small rooms, his dolls were all kept in cabinets or on shelves in his own bedroom. After a moment of silence, he lowered his tilted chin and pouted. Tell me, what materials what does your friend need? The reward for Beander materials is at least 100 pounds, and for auxiliary materials, at least 10 pounds. Additionally, I will collect an extra portion of remuneration from you, it's what I deserve. He paused, then suddenly asked cautiously, wait, who is that friend of yours? It wouldn't be that damned guy who tricked me into the Harvest Church, would it? It's not him, Klein calmly shook his head. Emlyn nodded, quickly regaining his composure. All right then, what materials do you need? It's a friend of mine. After emphasizing that it was his friend, Klein described the materials he needed. The mutated pituitary gland of a 1,000-faced hunter, along with 100 milliliters of its blood, and 5 strands of deep-sea naga hair. Emlyn nodded. Okay, I've noted it. By the way, if there are any clues, how should I contact you afterward, or do you come here every day to pray to the Mother Goddess, once? After a moment of silence, Klein gave his address. 15 Minsk Street, Sherwood Borough. Unless I have a commission, I'm there most of the time. The two chatted for a bit longer, and as he was about to leave, Emlyn suddenly lowered his voice and asked. Mr. Detective, do you know any other dependents of deities, or powerful beyonders who aren't afraid of offending dependents? Klein directly shook his head. I don't. Perhaps I do know some, but they are dependents of evil gods or hidden existences. A flicker of disappointment crossed Emlyn's crimson eyes. He said nothing more, turned, and returned to his previous spot, picking up a rag to continue wiping the candelabra. Was this guy's serious demeanor just an act? Shaking his head to clear his thoughts, he turned and left the Harvest Church. In the evening, Syrian, who had just returned with a takeout dinner from an outside restaurant, sensed something and looked back, just in time to see many bowl-sized green vines descending from the ceiling. In the blink of an eye, the green vines covered the entire room, weaving a forest of layered green. Then he saw Bernadette, dressed in a white Intis-style shirt and a dark black jacket, with a slender rapier at her waist and a tricorn hat beside her, looking like a standard sea captain. Syrian bowed slightly, saluting her. Good afternoon, madam. I didn't expect you to return from the raging sea so quickly. Bernadette glanced at him with a slightly surprised look. Your news is quite well informed. As she spoke, she summoned an invisible servant and took a brass-colored compass with a constantly spinning pointer from its hand. The moment the compass appeared, Syrian keenly noticed a subtle distortion in the surrounding space, gradually becoming disordered, like an effervescent tablet dropped into calm water. If it lasted a little longer, it might form doors, leading to unknown places. Syrian curiously observed the compass in Bernadette's hand for a while. Its spiritual radiance seemed to be only of sequence 5, but the changes in the surrounding space made him feel that this was not the level expected of a sequence 5. Noticing his gaze, Bernadette briefly introduced it. It's called the Unceasing Compass. It was once a member of Emperor Rosel's fleet. Later, due to unknown reasons, it died suddenly, and the remaining Beander characteristic combined with a compass to form this sealed artifact. It corresponds to the Traveler, sequence 5 of the Apprentice pathway, but because of the contained pollution and overly troublesome negative effects, it is not practical. As she spoke, bright starlight swirled around her, then suddenly contracted, enveloping the unceasing compass in her hand. The brilliant starlight instantly solidified, turning into a translucent amber, sealing the compass within. Then she threw the compass, sealed in translucent amber, to Syrian. Its negative effects are mainly two. First, the holder cannot stay in one place for a long time, even a constantly moving vehicle is not allowed. The holder must move non-stop, otherwise, they will be randomly teleported by suddenly appearing doors. These doors have no fixed destination, they might appear in the deep sea, or high in the sky, or in volcanoes, or between rock crevices, which is quite dangerous. This includes the Traveler's Door, opened when actively using it, which often experiences random changes. Unless one is very familiar with spirit world roaming, it is not recommended to use it actively. The second negative effect comes from the unknown pollution it contains. After being randomly teleported too many times, one will be stared at by unknown existences. Before you have the ability to shatter it, or rely on sealing to reduce the negative effects, I do not recommend you use it. Syrian looked at the compass, sealed in translucent amber, in his hand, feeling a burning sensation as if he wanted to throw it away immediately. This was not a mystical item at all, it was a complete sealed artifact. He paused, then asked gravely, "How long will this seal you left last?" Bernadette replied without hesitation, "About half a month. The longer the time, the less effective the seal. I will be staying in Backland for a while. After you find the seal's effect weakening, you can find me anytime to reinforce it. I have a premonition that the opportunity you mentioned is about to appear. After I advance to Sage, I will personally help you shatter it. After shattering and recondensing, the Beander characteristic will become pure, and you can directly use it to concoct a potion." He hesitated for a moment, then chose the latter between entrusting the compass to Bernadette for safekeeping until she advanced to an angel and then shattering it into a characteristic for him, or keeping it himself and occasionally asking her to reinforce the seal. "I also have an angel-level messenger now. I can completely ask Edfarna to help me seal it, turning it into a mystical item that can be used to a certain extent. It's just that paying the remuneration isn't easy. He only wants pollution from myself to counteract the Chaos Sea pollution he's tainted with, but even if I record Bernadette's mystical reenactment, I can't control it precisely. I could actually throw the problem to Edfarna, since it's his desired remuneration." Collecting his thoughts, he looked back at Bernadette and asked, "Can I record the mystical reenactment of the ugly duckling again?" "You may." After a slight surprise, Bernadette nodded slightly, not asking where the spear of Longinus he recorded earlier had been used. Syrian felt very lucky today. In Bernadette's only 2 opportunities to demonstrate, he successfully recorded the mystical reenactment of the ugly duckling in one go. Afterward, at Bernadette's request, he translated another page of Emperor Rosel's romantic diary and taught her some of the Chinese characters within it. The low-pressure lesson ended, and before Bernadette left, he quickly spoke. "I want to create a mystical item for summoning messengers. Can you recommend a craftsman for me?" The retracting green vines around them suddenly stopped. Bernadette looked at him with surprise, then nodded. "You may. Give me the incantation for summoning messengers." Chapter 223, Amon's Mausoleum. After writing down a summoning incantation for a messenger and briefly describing her requirements, Bernadette left with a promise to wait a week, not even accepting the deposit he had prepared. As the surrounding layers of green vines vanished, Syrian, back in the dining room, saw Haven had returned home and was sitting at the dining table, eating the dinner he had prepared for himself. He hesitated for a moment but ultimately didn't mention that he had bought the dinner for himself. Feeling the gaze on him, Haven, who was eating heartily, looked up at him. "When did you appear? Today's dinner is good, but you didn't make it yourself, did you?" Syrian nodded slightly. "A new restaurant has opened on Wildy Street, number 36. He paused, then asked with some curiosity, "Why are you back so early today?" "Oh, and how is your savon potion digesting?" Hearing this question, Haven stopped eating and looked up at him, his expression barely concealing his excitement as he said, "Bicycles have already gone into production and will be officially released soon. This means our investment will see returns very quickly. After that, besides the bicycle release, there shouldn't be much else to do. I can relax a bit. The savon potion. Well, I haven't really paid much attention. You know, savon doesn't have the flashy and interesting abilities like Apprentice. In fact, many times I even forget that I'm a Beander. But I feel like the savon potion is almost digested. I just need to study it more deeply and invent some things." Syrian nodded thoughtfully. "That's not bad. I'll help you look out for the archaeologist potion formula later." Archaeologist. A hint of confusion flashed across Haven's face. Won't that be too much of a cross-specialization? I know nothing about archaeology. What's that? Later there will be artisan, astronomer, alchemist. Full-scale development in the scientific field. He grumbled to himself, then casually reassured him. It's fine. The potion comes with some knowledge, and savon itself has good learning abilities. He paused, then brought up his plan to digest the potion at sea. I have been promoted to scribe, and the corresponding role-playing requires traveling to different places, recording local scenery, customs, and Beander abilities. I plan to go to sea first. The northern continent nations all have colonies at sea, plus the local natives. I can record a large amount of scenery and customs in a short time. Don't worry, I've already recorded the teleportation ability in advance. If I encounter danger, I can escape immediately, and I can return at any time. Haven frowned, wanting to speak but holding back for a long time, finally choosing to nod. I have no objections. I trust your judgment and ability. But one thing, don't let me see your picture on an official wanted list, and especially don't let father and mother see it. Syrian smiled and patted his shoulder. Don't worry, I'm just going on a trip to see the scenery and customs at sea. Haven nodded. When do you plan to leave? Syrian pondered, then said, tomorrow, or the day after. Late at night, after confirming that Haven was asleep, Syrian put on his coat, took down the screaming scroll hanging by his desk, and, after putting on the peacemaker and the interrogator ring he hadn't used in a long time, reached out and pressed his hand on the full-length mirror in the corner. A quiet blue light rippled silently, condensing into an illusory door on the mirror's surface. Then Syrian took a step forward, his figure passing through the illusory door as if through a water curtain, entering the mirror world. The outskirts of Backland, downstream of the Tassoc River. The semicircular crimson moon barely emerged from the mist in the sky, its crimson moonlight illuminating the surroundings. Amidst the gurgling water, a quiet blue light rippled across the water, rapidly solidifying into an illusory door reflected in the river. The next second, Syrian, with pairs of transparent, dragonfly wing-like membrane wings extending from his back, flew out from behind the door, reflected in the river and landed steadily on the riverbank. He looked around, scanning the area. After confirming there were no anomalies, he chanted in a low voice. The fool who does not belong to this era, the mysterious ruler above the gray fog, the yellow-black king who controls good luck. I need some help to find the exact entrance to Amon's mausoleum. Having received the message in advance, Klein, who was not yet asleep, flipped out of bed in one swift motion. He quickly entered the washroom, left a spiritual wall, and then immediately took 4 steps backward, entering above the gray fog. Using the prayer light representing Syrian, he cast his gaze towards the Tassoc River bank in reality. After confirming that there were no hidden Amen avatars nearby, he confidently scanned the surroundings, recalling the location Miss Sharon had marked on the map. After some comparison, he locked his gaze on a hidden crevice at the foot of the mountain, less than 100 meters from Syrian. Then he projected the scene he saw into the crimson star representing Syrian. In reality, a dense gray mist suddenly permeated Syrian's vision, and at the same time, a somewhat dim, real-time monitoring-like image appeared in his mind. At the same time, the voice of the fool, Klein, echoed in his ear. It's here. No traces of Amon's avatars were found around. The help I can offer is to use a paper figure angel to clear some negative statuses for you and to guide you. Be careful yourself. Syrian nodded calmly. That's enough. Oh, and if I don't ask for help later, you'd best not cast your gaze. Given Amon's personality, there might be 1 or 2 worms of time here. I understand. After Klein replied, Syrian felt the gaze from above disappear from him. He looked around, confirmed the direction, and then headed straight for the entrance to Amon's mausoleum that Klein had pointed out. In less than a minute, he found the crevice, wide enough for 2 adults to pass through, which looked like it had been formed by a mountain collapse. Snap! With a crisp snap of his fingers, the surroundings instantly lit up with bright but not dazzling light. This was a flash trick he had improved to be freely controlled, which he called illumination spell. He peered into the brightly lit mountain crevice for a while, then pulled a gold coin from his pocket and tossed it into the air. After a simple divination, he stepped into the crevice and walked downwards. After about half a minute, the surroundings suddenly widened, and he entered an artificially modified underground cave. Then he heard the flapping of bats' wings and the hissing of snakes. Syrian frowned and looked around, then clenched his right hand into a fist, holding it across his chest. His eyes turned pure white, as if gathering a large amount of light. The next second, a brilliant white light emanated from his eyes, illuminating the entire underground cave. The sudden strong light caused the bats hanging upside down from the cave ceiling and the snakes coiled on the rock walls and ground to be temporarily blinded, falling into confusion and panic, scattering but unable to find their way. Syrian's dragonfly wing-like membrane wings on his back gently flapped, allowing him to float in midair, flying towards the bronze cast gate ahead. Only when he got closer did he realize that the bronze gate had already split open, forming a gap wide enough for an adult to pass through. He didn't pay it any mind, directly pressed his hand on the gate. A quiet blue light rippled outwards like water, and then he passed directly through it. Beyond the gate was darkness, with many scattered spiritual lights around, some dense, some faint. One could barely make out that this was a lightless, gloomy passageway. Snap! Syrian snapped his fingers, and bright but not dazzling light instantly illuminated the surroundings. The next second, a figure identical to him appeared before his eyes. Syrian calmly looked at the humanoid wraith disguised as himself. When there were many people, this type of Beander creature, skilled in disguise, could indeed easily cause panic, but he was alone now, making such a disguise seem foolish. Seemingly sensing the disdain in Syrian's calm eyes, him opposite him strangely wriggled his body, then lost its weight, turning into a translucent human skin that directly pounced on him. The humanoid wraith landed on Syrian, its thin body tightly enveloping him, attempting to suffocate him. But the next second, this humanoid wraith turned crimson, like a cooked shrimp, emitting wisps of green smoke and a sizzling sound. Ah! After a horrifying, non-human scream, the humanoid wraith covering Syrian released him and floated away, fleeing into the distance. Behind it, Syrian, covered in refined full-body armor condensed from pure dawn, reached both hands into the air before him, pulling out a silver-white two-handed greatsword from thin air. Whoosh! Amidst a brief whoosh, the crimson humanoid wraith was split in two from top left to bottom right. Syrian glanced around, then bent his knee and plunged the sword of dawn in his hand into the ground. The silver-white greatsword then disintegrated, transforming into countless, shimmering fragments of light like the dawn, forming a flashing and violent, sharp hurricane that swept all around. Storm of Light. Chapter 224, Stone Giant. Under Syrian's manipulation, the silver-white, flickering, and violent sharp hurricane gradually pressed forward, filling both sides of the passage with raging silver-white light, leaving no gap. In a few breaths, the storm of light swept through the entire passage. Anything it touched, whether a phantom revenant or a strange creature hiding in the darkness, had its body instantly shattered, cut into fragments no larger than a palm. Only after it had ravaged the entire passage did Syrian make the storm of light gradually dissipate. At the same time, the armor of dawn he wore, refined from pure morning light, also turned into light dust, shedding and vanishing. Around him, in the passage illuminated by illumination, the ground was strewn with scattered fragments of monster body tissue, some transparent, some fresh red. The already quiet passage became even more deathly silent, as if no living things remained. After a quick glance around, Syrian withdrew his gaze. It looks like someone cleared it out not long ago. What's left are mostly phantom-like creatures good at hiding, and most aren't strong. It should be the people from that Beander gathering Marich participated in. Unfortunately, none of them managed to leave in the end. After muttering a few words, he pulled out a screaming scroll, rolled into a stick shape, from his pocket. He shook it open and used the trick of telekinesis to make it hover in midair. As soon as it appeared, the distorted figure in the scroll bowed to him. "Great Master, your loyal servant is always waiting to serve you. May I ask, do you need anything from me now?" Syrian looked at the scroll before him, which had no hands or feet, and asked thoughtfully. "Can you help me collect the scattered Beander materials around?" The distorted figure on the scroll paused, then replied awkwardly. "Ah, Master, perhaps I need a zombie that I can manipulate, or perhaps you could draw real, functional hands and feet for me." Syrian looked at the scroll floating in midair, and instinctively imagined what it would look like with a pair of hands and feet. It was too much to behold. He quickly shook his head, pushing the thought out of his mind. He paused, then asked again, "Can a corpse from a painted illusion be manipulated by you as a zombie?" The distorted figure in the scroll immediately nodded. "As long as you agree, Master, I can turn it into a zombie and manipulate it." "But why don't you just draw a zombie directly, Master?" After 2 seconds of silence, Syrian took out a piece of white paper he carried with him and spread it on the ground. Then, using the spiritual matter and blood from the deceased Beander creatures around as paint, he drew a zombie with a tragic death and a ferocious posture. After finishing the drawing, he stood up and stepped back 2 paces, simultaneously raising his hand and snapping his fingers. Snap! With a crisp sound, a layer of hazy shadow appeared on the simple drawing on the paper spread on the ground, gradually becoming distorted. Finally, it detached from the paper and appeared in reality. You control it and help me collect materials. As he spoke, he manipulated the scroll floating in midair to approach the imagined zombie. As you command, great and omnipotent master. The distorted figure on the scroll praised him with pleasure, then looked at the imagined zombie before it. A faint green light flickered across its distorted, somewhat abstract face. The next second, the distorted figure from the scroll was reflected in the zombie's 2 half-remaining eyeballs. Under its manipulation, the zombie stiffly pressed its left hand, which had only 3 fingers left, to its chest and bowed to Xiang. Looking at the zombie before him, whose limbs were all damaged to varying degrees and whose legs were uneven, Xiang felt for the first time that being lazy when drawing was also a sin. It was an eyesore. Even if it wasn't a zombie, it could star in a horror movie just by appearing. However, things created by illusion cannot automatically complete themselves. I need to pay attention to that when drawing in the future. As his thoughts drifted, he waved his hand at the zombie. After bowing, the latter grabbed the scroll floating in midair with one hand, then limped towards the nearest remnant of a human skin phantom's characteristic. After waiting for a while, until the zombie manipulated by the distorted figure in the scroll had picked up all the fallen Beyonder materials, Xiang then led it towards the back of the passage. Beyond the passage was a hall with a high vaulted ceiling. The ground was covered with many broken gray-blue boulders, and the surrounding walls were covered with faded frescoes and ancient, long-extinguished lampstands. Clack, clack. The sounds of cracking flagstones and rolling rubble caught Xiang's attention. Prompted by his spiritual intuition, he turned his head and looked towards a broken corner of the hall. Then he saw a gray-white stone giant, estimated to be 3 meters tall, slowly standing up, propping itself against the wall. Its body seemed to be composed of large boulders, giving it a rough texture. Its face was pockmarked, without distinct eyes, nose, mouth, or ears. Roar. After a deep, muffled roar, like many large rocks colliding, the stone giant that had crawled out of the corner of the wall charged towards him. Each of its steps made a heavy thumping sound, causing Xiang to feel the floor beneath his feet tremble slightly. A stone giant. Looking at the stone giant charging towards him, a hint of confusion flashed across Xiang's face. He couldn't understand why such a Beyonder creature as a stone giant would appear in Amon's mausoleum. It couldn't be said to have no connection with the Amon's family, it could only be said to be completely unrelated. Moreover, a dark, damp mausoleum without a large amount of stone clearly did not conform to the stone giant's living habits. Watching the stone giant getting closer, Xiang no longer pondered why it appeared here. His right thumb, placed at his side, rubbed the brass ring on his index finger twice. The next second, streaks of electric light flashed in his eyes, as if lightning from the depths of his consciousness. Mental piercing. The stone giant charging towards him paused, as if struck hard in the head, losing its balance and falling heavily to the ground. Xiang calmly watched the stone giant, which had created a dent in the tomb floor. Streaks of electric light continuously emanated from his bright eyes, like a swinging whip of pain. The stone giant on the ground clutched its head and rolled in pain. Its muffled sounds were filled with agony and anger. As the stone giant writhed in pain before him, Xiang noticed that it had many cuts and gashes, as if from knives and axes, and some scorched marks. Although they didn't look very serious, that was relative to its 3-meter-tall body. Clearly, this stone giant had been severely beaten not long ago. Xiang carefully examined the wounds on the stone giant's body, then turned his head to look at the corner of the wall from which it had emerged, which looked like a large hole dug out by someone. He seemed to know how this stone giant had appeared in Amon's mausoleum. This was a stone giant that had accidentally dug through Amon's mausoleum, coincidentally encountered the previous group of Beyonders who came to explore, and then got a good beating. He seemed to have been mistaken for a companion of that previous group, which was why it had charged at him upon sight. As for why it would dig into Amon's mausoleum, Xiang guessed it probably found the stone there particularly tasty. After a moment of wandering thoughts, he turned his head to look at the distorted figure manipulating the zombie and calmly said, I'll leave it to you to deal with. The zombie's crooked mouth emitted the hoarse, high-pitched, unpleasant voice of the distorted figure. No problem, mission accomplished. With that, it aimed the scroll it held at the stone giant, which was writhing in pain on the ground. A chilling wind, whose source was unknown, suddenly arose, causing the stone giant's rolling movements on the floor to stiffen, then it began to tremble uncontrollably. At the same time, the distorted figure in the scroll, clutching its head with both hands, suddenly magnified. Its distorted, exaggerated face filled the entire scroll, with its mouth occupying 1/3 of the image. The air outside the scroll became distorted in ripples. A silent, soul-piercing shriek erupted instantly. Sirian, behind the zombie, reached out to cover his ears, then sealed his hearing with his Beyonder powers, only then feeling a little better. Directly in front of the scroll, the stone giant, which had faced the revenant's shriek, suddenly became motionless, lying there like a pile of lifeless rubble. Only when the distorted figure in the scroll finished shrieking did Sirian activate his spiritual vision to observe. The spiritual light on the stone giant's body was much dimmer than before, but it wasn't dead, its spirit had merely fallen silent, seemingly unconscious. Sirian raised an eyebrow slightly. He knew that stone giants, with their powerful physical defense capable of withstanding artillery barrages, would be relatively vulnerable in terms of spirit and mind, but he hadn't expected them to be this fragile. Chapter 225, I want a name. Respected master, can I turn it into a zombie? Although it's a bit ugly, its body is very strong and suitable for making a zombie. It will be more durable than ordinary corpses. Sirian looked at the stone giant lying on the floor, unconscious, and asked with some curiosity. Can a stone giant also be made into a zombie? The zombie, manipulated by the twisted figure in the painting, quickly nodded. Yes, any intact corpse can be used. However, to prevent its unnaturally constructed body from collapsing, the core, which is condensed from its Beyonder characteristic, cannot be removed for now. Otherwise, it will collapse into a pile of useless stones within a few minutes. Sirian nodded. All right, you can use it. Thank you for your generosity and kindness. The zombie manipulated by the painting even raised its tone of voice. Then, under Sirian's curious gaze, the zombie approached the unconscious stone giant on the ground, holding the painting. The twisted figure in the painting made a face, spewing out a large amount of black gas from its mouth and nose, which swirled and condensed into an illusory skull that rushed towards the target stone giant's face, which had no obvious features. The illusory skull, imbued with a strong sense of death, was like an envoy from the underworld. Wherever it passed, life withered. Even the stone giant, whose body was constructed from a large amount of rock, showed signs of weathering and decay on its stone blocks. In Sirian's spiritual vision, the faint white light of the stone giant's corresponding etheric body was rapidly dissipating, especially around its head, where there was almost no spiritual light left, as if that vitality had completely vanished. Soon, a large amount of black gas seeped out from within the stone giant's body, leaving strange patterns on its granite-like surface, resembling intertwined thorns, imbued with an eerie and deathly stillness. Then, under Sirian's gaze, the lifeless stone giant slowly stood up. Sirian felt that the rocks on the zombie stone giant's body were somewhat loose and crumbling, with obvious signs of weathering and decay, like an outdated model picked up from a junkyard. He wondered if it was just his imagination. Noticing the doubt in his eyes, the zombie manipulated by the twisted figure in the painting quickly explained, "Apologies, master, my abilities are limited. The body strength of a corpse at the stone giant's level will decline to a certain extent after being converted into a zombie. However, compared to when it was alive, it no longer has weaknesses in terms of spirit and spiritual body, and it can master some death-related spell abilities." Sirian nodded. "Let's go. Have it lead the way. We're going to the tomb chamber deeper inside. Leave it to me." As he spoke, the twisted figure in the painting manipulated the zombie stone giant to walk towards the main tomb chamber deeper in the hall. With each heavy step, the tall and massive stone giant produced a thudding sound, and Sirian could even see fine sand falling from its weathered body. He had a feeling this zombie stone giant would fall apart after a few more steps. He muttered to himself for a moment, then casually asked, "How long can a zombie stone giant last after being zombified?" The ordinary zombie walking beside him, holding a painting, was silent for a moment before replying. If well maintained, it should last 1 to 3 years. If it lacks maintenance and frequently engages in combat, it will be completely damaged in about 1 day to 1 month. This is related to the intensity of combat. After all, it is already a corpse. Although it can still move normally under the manipulation of the power of the death domain, it no longer has the recovery ability of a normal body. As they conversed, the person, the painting, and the 2 zombies arrived at the narrow passage leading from the hall to the main tomb chamber. In front of the passage, the zombie stone giant suddenly stopped. The zombie accompanying Syrian suddenly said seriously, "Master, I sense a very strong danger in this passage." "I feel it too." Syrian nodded, stepping past the stone giant to the front of the passage. The narrow passage was estimated to be only 2 meters wide but nearly 100 meters long. Syrian used 2 lighting spells consecutively to fully illuminate it. The floor was paved with dark green stone slabs. At the end near the entrance, a layer of decayed dust covered the slabs, upon which lay quietly clusters of Beander characteristics and mystical items filled with spiritual light, like a display window in a shop. On both sides of the passage walls, there was a row of classical iron lamp holders, and between every 2 lamp holders hung 1 or 2 exquisite, realistic, yet distorted portrait frames. Syrian's gaze lingered briefly on the Beander characteristics and mystical items on the floor, then he looked up at the portraits on both sides. These portraits were so realistic that it felt as if living people had been forcefully stuffed into the paintings, rather than simply being depicted with brushstrokes. After a moment of silence, he turned his head to look at the screaming painting held by the zombie. The twisted figure in the painting nervously retreated, saying, Master, I can die too. And I am just a painting, I cannot solve the strange power that turns people into paintings on my own." Snap. Syrian didn't waste words with it. He raised his hand and snapped his fingers, causing the painting in the zombie's hand to float in front of him. Theoretically, you could indeed be sucked into the painting, but you are originally a creature of the painting, so you won't die from it, at most you'll be sealed. Moreover, you can control zombies, and zombies don't have spiritual bodies, so they shouldn't be affected. The twisted figure in the painting shook its head repeatedly. Zombies are controlled by my spirit, so they would still be affected. They would then become true corpses. And I myself am just a painting, without hands or feet. Syrian pondered and said, I can help you step out of the painting. After a moment of internal struggle, the twisted figure in the painting looked at Syrian and cautiously asked. Then, great and benevolent master, may I make a request? What request? Syrian raised an eyebrow. The figure in the painting immediately said, I want a name. I feel that I need a name that belongs to me, just as everyone has their own name, and even mystical items and sealed artifacts have their own codes and designations. Syrian was a little surprised but nodded without hesitation. All right, do you want to choose your own name, or do you want me to give you one? The figure in the painting was so excited it almost twisted itself into a vertical wave. Great Master, if you are willing to personally bestow a name upon me, I will forever remember this moment, remember this honor. Syrian pondered for a moment and said, let's call you, Steve. The Beander characteristic integrated into this painting came from the Revenant, Steve of the Rose school of thought, so it is reasonable for the living portrait in the painting to be called Steve. This is definitely not because I am bad at naming. As his thoughts wandered, the twisted figure in the painting was already cheering. Great Master, your loyal servant Steve will offer you the highest respect. I will forever follow behind you, until the world collapses and the painting is destroyed. Syrian, already accustomed to such flattery, paid no mind to it, even enjoying it a little. After Steve had finished pledging his loyalty, he finally said, I will send you to the end of the passage and use illusion to temporarily allow you to step out of the painting. You just need to flip over the portrait with the monocle. Steve in the painting assured him, no problem. Syrian nodded, then turned to look into the depths of the passage, his eyes reflecting an illusory, slowly turning book. I came, I saw, I recorded. After a brief incantation, brilliant starlight lit up around him, outlining an illusory door in front of him. At the same time, at the end of the passage ahead, an identical illusory door appeared. Short-distance fixed-point teleportation, unlike a flash, requires opening 2 connected doors simultaneously, rather than directly teleporting oneself. Feeling his spiritual energy rapidly draining at an extremely abnormal rate, Xiang did not hesitate and directly threw the painting in his hand into the door. On the other side of the passage, from the illusory door condensed from starlight, the painting thrown by Xiang flew out from behind the door. Before the painting could land, Steve, clutching his head in a screaming posture, floated out from within the painting. His body was semi-transparent, appearing weightless and without temperature, just like a real revenant specter. As soon as he appeared, his body uncontrollably drifted towards the portrait frame ahead. His already distorted body, under the suction of the frame and his own struggle, was rapidly turning into a long, thin noodle. Despite his full resistance, his body continued to draw closer to that portrait frame. Before his illusory body was completely sucked into the frame, he reached out and pressed the edge of the frame, then forcefully threw it to the ground. For more thrilling fanfiction stories like this, check out my channel Fanfic Audiobook. Dive into epic adventures, mysterious realms, and legendary journeys brought to life through immersive storytelling. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more amazing audiobooks.